Imagine stepping out your front door, but the world you know is entirely gone. There are no forests, no familiar rivers, no sprawling cities. Instead, you are standing at the bottom of a canyon of sheer blue-white ice. You look up, and the ice wall stretches higher than the tallest skyscrapers ever built by human hands. The air is so unimaginably cold that every breath feels like swallowing broken glass. The wind screams across a desolate, frozen plain, carrying with it a relentless, blinding snow. If you were standing in what is now New York City, Chicago, or Toronto roughly 20,000 years ago, this would not be a nightmare. This would be your reality. You would be standing beneath the crushing, colossal weight of the Laurentide Ice Sheet. Welcome to Earth's documentary. Today, we are stripping away the green, temperate, familiar world we live in right now to uncover the most terrifying, awe-inspiring, and enduring mystery in the deep history of our planet, the Ice Age. But this is not just a story about the cold. It is a story about a rhythm, a heartbeat hidden deep within the mechanics of the solar system that has the power to transform a vibrant, blue planet into a frozen wasteland, over and over again like clockwork. For millions of years, Earth has been locked in a cosmic battle between fire and ice, governed by forces so immense and invisible that scientists have spent generations trying to decode them. Let us travel back to the period scientists simply called the last glacial maximum. It is a clinical name for a world that was violently, dramatically alien. A shift of merely a few degrees in the global average temperature was all it took to completely redraw the map of the Earth. In North America, the Laurentide Ice Sheet was a monster of nature. It swallowed nearly the entirety of Canada and plunged deep into the northern United States. This was not a thin layer of frost. In some places, this ice was over 3 kilometers thick. 3,000 meters of solid, compressed, brutal ice. Imagine the weight of an entire mountain range, but made of frozen water, pressing down on the continent. The sheer mass of this ice was so incomprehensibly heavy that it physically deformed the Earth. The solid rock of the planet's crust buckled and sank hundreds of meters downward, crying out under the astronomical pressure. Even today, thousands of years after the ice melted, the land in North America and Scandinavia is still slowly bouncing back, rising millimeter by millimeter, recovering from the crushing embrace of the glaciers. Meanwhile, places that were already cold became fortresses of ice. Greenland and Antarctica saw their ice sheets expand outward and upward, becoming impenetrable frozen continents. And because so much of the Earth's water was locked away in these colossal towers of solid ice, global sea levels plummeted. The oceans shrank. They dropped by an astonishing 120 meters. Coastlines that we know today simply did not exist. You could walk across dry land from continental Europe to the British Isles. You could cross from Asia to North America over a vast, grassy plain known as Beringia. The shallow seas were drained, revealing millions of square miles of new, harsh land. More than 30% of Earth's continental surface was buried under permanent, unyielding ice. And yet, moving southward, away from the towering glacial walls, the world did not become entirely lifeless. Instead, it transformed into something breathtaking. Huge swaths of the northern hemisphere became a cold tundra. This was a brutal, unforgiving environment. The growing seasons for plants were violently short, measured in mere weeks before the freezing dark returned. Winter temperatures routinely plunged below minus 40 degrees Celsius. The wind was a constant, sweeping across flat landscapes with nothing to break its momentum. But astonishingly, against all odds, this frozen world was teeming with life. Welcome to the Mammoth Steppe, stretching from the coast of modern-day France, all the way across Eurasia, over the Bering Land Bridge, and deep into North America. This was the most extensive biome on Earth. It was a vast, continuous sea of dry, cold grasslands, and it was definitely alive. If you stood on this steppe, the ground would tremble beneath your feet. Through the swirling snow and dry dust, monumental silhouettes would emerge. Herds of woolly mammoths, creatures the size of modern African elephants, but covered in thick, shaggy coats of dark hair, with curved tusks reaching up to 4 meters long. They moved like dreadnoughts through the snow, using their massive tusks to scrape away the winter frost to reach the nutritious grasses beneath. Beside them roamed the woolly rhinoceros, a prehistoric tank armed with a devastating, flattened horn perfectly adapted to sweeping away snow. Massive ancient bison, wild horses, and a gigantic Irish elk with antlers so wide they defied logic all shared this frozen plain. It was one of the most productive, biomass-rich ecosystems the planet has ever seen. Predators stalked the edges of these herds. Cave lions, dire wolves, and the iconic saber-toothed cats. Their dagger-like teeth designed to rip through the thick hides and fat layers of Ice Age herbivores. It was a world of giants, perfectly adapted to a planet in the grip of a deep freeze. But how did this happen? How does a planet known for its liquid oceans and thriving tropical jungles suddenly lock a third of its landmass in ice? And more unsettlingly, why has it happened repeatedly? What forces could possibly drive such a catastrophic, total transformation of the global climate? What triggers these cycles of deep freeze, holding the world hostage for tens of thousands of years, only to relent and then freeze again? To answer that, scientists realized they could not just look at the rocks or the fossils. Bones could tell them who lived and who died, but they could not tell them what the air felt like. They could not tell them the chemical makeup of a winter storm 100,000 years ago. To understand the Ice Age, scientists had to look inside the ice itself. Greenland and Antarctica are not just frozen wastelands. They are the greatest libraries of natural history ever created. They are literal time machines. Every single year, for millions of years, snow has fallen on these continents. And in the deep interior, it is so profoundly cold that the snow never melts. Year after year, century after century, snow falls on top of snow. The weight of the new snow compresses the layers beneath it. The delicate, airy snowflakes are crushed together, transforming first into a granular substance called firn, and eventually, under immense pressure, into solid, incredibly dense glacial ice. But something miraculous happens during this transformation. As the snow is compressed into ice, the tiny spaces of air between the snowflakes get trapped. They are sealed off from the outside world entirely. They become microscopic bubbles of air, permanently encased in a prison of ice. And that air is not modern air. It is the exact atmosphere of the Earth at the very moment that snow fell. Realizing this, scientists embarked on some of the most grueling, extreme engineering projects in human history. To read this frozen archive, they had to drill in environments where temperatures drop to minus 80 degrees Celsius, where metal turns brittle and snaps, and where a single storm can bury a base camp. Researchers set up specialized drilling rigs to bore straight down into the heart of the ice sheets. They drilled down hundreds of meters, then thousands. They pierced more than 3 kilometers deep into the ancient ice. The physical labor was staggering, a battle against extreme cold, crushing isolation, and immense mechanical challenges. But what they pulled up from the dark depths of the glacier changed our understanding of the Earth forever. When an ice core is brought to the surface, it looks like a long, solid cylinder of glass. It is a transparent, sparkling tube, sometimes visually banded with faint, dark rings marking the passage of seasons. But when you look closely, when you hold a light to it, you see them, millions upon millions of tiny, glittering imperfections, countless microscopic bubbles. If you put a piece of this deep ice in a glass of water, as it melts, it actually fizzes and pops. That sound is the breath of the ancient Earth escaping. It is a release of air that has not seen the light of day for tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of years. By taking these ice cores into highly sanitized, freezing laboratories, scientists can carefully crush the ice in a vacuum. They capture the escaping gas and feed it into highly sensitive mass spectrometers. In doing so, they achieve the impossible. They chemically analyze the ghosts of a prehistoric atmosphere. They measure the exact concentrations of carbon dioxide. They measure the methane. They identify the precise cocktail of greenhouse gases that shrouded the Earth during the reign of the mammoths. But the bubbles are only the first chapter of the story. Embedded deep between the annual layers of snowfall is a fine, almost imperceptible grit. Dust. Where did it come from? It was carried on high-altitude winds from deserts halfway across the globe during the glacial periods. When the world was locked in ice, the oceans surrendered their moisture. The global climate became astonishingly dry. Deserts expanded, creeping across continents and violent, Relentless storms whipped millions of tons of dust into the atmosphere. This dust circled the globe before eventually falling onto the pristine white sheets of Antarctica and Greenland. By measuring the concentration of dust in the ice cores, scientists can trace the intensity of ancient winds. They can map out exactly when the world plunged into the harshest, driest, most brutal phases of the Ice Age. Sometimes, the ice yields an even more violent marker: distinct, dark, ash-colored layers. These are the fingerprints of cataclysmic volcanic eruptions. When a supervolcano erupted tens of thousands of years ago on the other side of the planet, the ash was blasted into the stratosphere, blocking out the sun and raining down on the poles. These ash layers provide exact chronological time stamps, allowing scientists to cross-reference their ice cores with geological records from all over the world. Yet, perhaps the most powerful and mind-bending tool hidden inside the ice requires looking at the water itself. To decode the actual temperature of the ancient Earth, scientists had to look at the atoms. Water, as we know, is H2O, 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen atom. But not all oxygen atoms are created equal. Most of the oxygen in the world is known as oxygen-16. It has 8 protons and 8 neutrons. It is light common and easily evaporated by the sun. But there's a rarer, heavier sibling, oxygen-18, which has 2 extra neutrons. Because it is heavier, it takes more heat, more solar energy, to evaporate a water molecule containing oxygen-18 from the ocean into the atmosphere. And when the atmosphere cools down, that heavy water is the first to condense and fall back down as rain or snow. This simple physics reality created the ultimate paleothermometer. When the global climate was warm, there was plenty of energy to evaporate that heavy oxygen-18 from the oceans, carry it to the sky, and drop it as snow on the ice sheets. But when the Earth plunged into an ice age, the oceans cooled. There was less energy. The heavy oxygen-18 struggled to evaporate, and what little did evaporate quickly fell out of the clouds as rain long before it ever reached the poles. Therefore, the snow that fell on Antarctica and Greenland during an ice age was drastically depleted of heavy oxygen. By meticulously slicing the ice cores layer by layer and measuring the exact ratio of light to heavy oxygen in the frozen water, scientists did something akin to reading a cosmic barcode. They mathematically reconstructed the exact temperature of the planet for every single year, going back an astonishing 800,000 years. When they took all this data, the greenhouse gases from the bubbles, the dust from the ancient winds, the temperature readings from the oxygen isotopes, and plotted on a massive timeline, a terrifying and beautiful pattern emerged. Earth's climate is not stable. It is not a straight line. It is a wildly oscillating wave. The planet relentlessly, violently shifts between 2 extreme states. Long, brutal glacial periods where ice consumes the continents, lasting for many tens of thousands of years. And then short, rapid bursts of warmth. Brief interludes where the ice retreats. Forests explode across the land and the planet breathes. These are the interglacial periods. We are living in one right now. But the most staggering revelation from the ice cores was the timing, the rhythm. When scientists zoomed out and looked at the last million years, the ice ages were not random. They weren't caused by unpredictable volcanic eruptions or random solar flares. They were operating on a schedule. They were repeating in massive, predictable cycles of roughly 100,000 years. Earth would freeze deep for tens of thousands of years. The ice would reach a terrifying maximum. And then, almost instantly in geological terms, the planet would rapidly warm. The ice would collapse, sea levels would violently rise, and a warm period would begin. And then, the slow, relentless slide back into the deep freeze would start all over again. 100,000-year heartbeat. Tick, tock, freeze, thaw. What in the universe could possibly control such a massive, unrelenting rhythm? The Earth alone could not be doing this. No volcano, no ocean current, no shifting continent operates on a perfect 100,000-year metronome. The answer to the greatest climate mystery in Earth's history could not be found by looking down into the ice. To understand why the Earth was freezing, humanity had to look up, way up, beyond the atmosphere, beyond the moon, and into the dark, silent mechanics of the solar system itself. In the early 20th century, While the world was consuming itself in the mechanized slaughter of the First World War, a Serbian mathematician, an astronomer named Milankovitch was a prisoner of war, sitting in a room in Budapest, with nothing but pen, paper, and the boundless theater of his own mind. He began to calculate the gravitational ballet of the solar system. He was attempting to do something that seemed utterly impossible. He wanted to prove that the deep, freezing pulses of the Earth were dictated by the stars. Milankovitch understood a fundamental truth about our planet that most people never consider. The Earth does not float in a peaceful, empty void. It is subjected to the relentless, invisible, and colossal gravitational pulls of the universe. Specifically, our tiny, rocky world is constantly being bullied by the giant of our own solar system, Jupiter, a gas giant so massive it could swallow over 1,000 Earths, and Saturn, with its immense mass and density, exert a constant gravitational tug on our planet. They are the puppet masters of Earth's trajectory. Over periods of tens of thousands of years, the gravitational influence of these massive planets slowly, almost imperceptibly, warps the Earth's orbit around the Sun. Milankovitch mapped out these tiny variations. He identified 3 distinct, major astronomical cycles, 3 invisible gears turning in the dark, altering the amount of solar radiation that reaches the surface of our world. Today, we call them the Milankovitch Cycles. The first gear is eccentricity. Right now, if you look at a diagram of the solar system, Earth's orbit looks like a nearly perfect circle, but it does not stay that way. Over a period of roughly 100,000 years, the relentless pull of Jupiter and Saturn stretches our orbit out. The circle slowly flattens, becoming noticeably elliptical or oval-shaped. When the orbit is stretched to its maximum eccentricity, the distance between the Earth and the Sun changes dramatically depending on where we are in our yearly journey. At our furthest point, the Sun becomes a slightly smaller, weaker star in the sky. This change in distance alters the total amount of solar energy the planet receives, creating a subtle but undeniable shift in the global temperature. The second gear is obliquity, or the tilt of the Earth's axis. Imagine a spinning top leaning slightly to one side. Currently, the Earth is tilted at an angle of 23.5 degrees relative to its orbital plane. This tilt is the entire reason we have seasons. When the northern hemisphere is tilted toward the sun, it experiences summer, while the southern hemisphere is plunged into winter. But this axis is not frozen in place. It is dynamic. Like a ship rocking slowly in a gentle swell, the Earth leans back and forth. Over a cycle lasting roughly 41,000 years, the tilt shifts between 22.1 degrees and 24.5 degrees. It sounds like a minuscule difference, a matter of 2 degrees. But on a planetary scale, it is the difference between a mild frost and a towering glacier. When the tilt is at its maximum, the seasons become violent and extreme. Summers are blazing hot, and winters are brutally cold. But when the Earth stands up straighter, when the tilt drops to its minimum of 22.1 degrees, the seasons mellow out, the contrast fades. The winters are slightly warmer, but crucially, the summers become remarkably cool. The third and final gear is the most subtle. It is called precession. It is the wobble. If you have ever spun a toy top on a table and watched it slow down, you've seen the top of its axis begin to trace a slow circle in the air. The Earth is doing the exact same thing. Our planet wobbles on its axis, carving a slow, conical shape through the cosmos, completing one full rotation every 26,000 years. This wobble dictates precisely when the seasons occur during our orbit. It decides whether the northern hemisphere experiences its summer, when the Earth is closest to the sun, or when it is furthest away in the cold depths of the elliptical orbit. Working by hand, painstakingly calculating the geometry of the solar system, Milankovitch synthesized these 3 cycles. He realized that it was not about the total amount of sunlight hitting the Earth over the entire year. The trigger for an ice age was incredibly specific. It was entirely dependent on what was happening during the summer in the high latitudes of the northern hemisphere. Why the north? Because that is where the land is. If you look at a globe from the bottom up, the southern hemisphere is dominated by the vast, unbroken Southern Ocean. But the north is crowded with immense land masses, North America, Europe, Asia. You cannot build a continent spanning ice sheet on open, restless water. You need bedrock. Milankovitch calculated that if the 3 cycles align just right, If the orbit was highly elliptical, the wobble placed the northern summer at the furthest point from the sun, and the axial tilt was exceptionally shallow, a critical threshold would be crossed. The summer in the northern hemisphere will become uniquely, devastatingly cool. Imagine it. A winter storm rolls across northern Canada, burying the landscape in thick, blinding snow. Usually, when July arrives, the sun burns bright and hot, melting the snow away, turning the tundra back into muddy wetlands. But in this new orbital alignment, July arrives, and the sun is just a little too distant. The angle is just a little too low. The heat is weak. August passes, and the snow does not melt. It survives the summer. When the next winter arrives, new snow falls on top of the old snow. The next summer is just as weak. More snow survives. Year after year, decade after decade, the snow accumulates. It packs down. It turns to ice. Slowly, silently, the glaciers are born. When modern scientists finally extracted the deep ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica decades after Milankovitch made his calculations, they overlaid his astronomical models onto the climate records trapped in the ice. The result was one of the most stunning validations of a scientific theory in human history. The peaks and valleys of global temperature locked in the ice matched the slow, turning gears of Milankovich's orbital cycles almost perfectly. But as the ice cores reached deeper into time, past 500,000 years, past 700,000 years, the triumphant clarity of Milankovitch cycles collided with a terrifying and inexplicable anomaly. The ice cores revealed that for the past 800,000 years, the Earth has been pulsing to a deep 100,000-year rhythm, marching perfectly in step with the eccentricity cycle, the stretching of Earth's orbit. But when the drills penetrated deeper, pulling up ice from 1,000,000 years ago, the rhythm abruptly changed. The 100,000-year cycle vanished. Instead, during the earlier chapters of the Pleistocene epoch, the ice ages were happening every 41,000 years. They were dancing to a completely different beat. They were strictly following the obliquity cycle, the tilting of the Earth's axis. And then, roughly 1,000,000 years ago, something broke. The Earth's climate system experienced a massive structural failure. Scientists call this the Mid-Pleistocene Transition. The 41,000-year ice ages, which were relatively short and mild, suddenly ceased. The system hesitated, stuttered, and then locked into a monstrous new groove. The ice ages became 100,000 years long. They became profoundly colder. The ice sheets grew unimaginably thick, refusing to melt for tens of thousands of years, crushing the continents with severity the planet hadn't seen in epochs. What caused this dramatic planetary gear shift? Milankovich's astronomical cycles did not change. Jupiter and Saturn did not alter their paths. The solar system was doing the exact same dance, but the Earth suddenly decided to react differently. It was as if someone had turned up the amplifier on the planet's cooling system to the absolute maximum. Scientists are still desperately hunting for the exact cause of the Mid-Pleistocene Transition, but they have uncovered clues that point to a system feeding on its own destruction. One leading hypothesis looks to the bedrock itself. Over millions of years, early glaciers acted like colossal, slow-moving bulldozers. They scraped away the soft soils and loose rocks of North America and Europe, exposing the hard, smooth, unyielding bedrock beneath. When new ice formed on this polished rock, it clung to it with terrifying strength. The ice sheets were able to grow thicker, heavier, and more permanent, refusing to be shaken off by the mild warming periods that used to melt them. Another theory points to the sky. As the planet cooled, it dried out. Vast, arid deserts formed, and screaming winds carried millions of tons of microscopic dust across the globe. When this dust settled on the ice, it initially darkened it, absorbing heat. But some scientists theorize that this massive influx of dust also carried essential nutrients, particularly iron, into the deep barren oceans, fertilizing massive blooms of algae that fundamentally alter the atmosphere. But beneath these competing theories lies a single, terrifying mechanism that rules our planet. It is the reason why a tiny, nearly invisible change in Earth's orbit can bury entire continents under 3 kilometers of ice. It is a planetary chain reaction known as the ice albedo feedback. Albedo is a simple concept with world-ending power. It is a measure of how much sunlight a surface reflects. Imagine walking barefoot on a blazing summer afternoon. If you walk on dark black asphalt, it burns your feet. The dark surface absorbs the sun's energy and turns it into heat. But if you step onto a bright white concrete sidewalk, it feels much cooler. The white surface acts like a mirror, bouncing the solar radiation back into the sky. The Earth functions the exact same way. Deep, dark oceans and vast, dense, green forests have a very low albedo. They soak up the sun's warmth, holding it in, acting like a giant thermal battery that keeps our world temperate and alive. But ice is white. It is one of the most reflective natural surfaces in the universe. When Milankovitch Cycles align to cool the northern summer, and the snow fails to melt, that snow acts like a mirror laid down on the Earth. It intercepts the incoming solar radiation and blasts it straight back out into the freezing vacuum of space. Because that energy is rejected, the local temperature drops even further. Because the temperature drops, the next winter produces even more snow. The white mirror expands. As the ice sheets creep southward, swallowing forests, burying grasslands, and covering the dark Earth, the planet's overall albedo begins to surge. The Earth is literally turning white. It becomes highly reflective. The more the ice grows, the more sunlight is reflected. The more sunlight is reflected, the colder the planet gets. The colder the planet gets, the faster the ice grows. It is a vicious, unstoppable, runaway train of refrigeration. What begins as a gentle, celestial nudge from Jupiter and Saturn is amplified by the ice albedo feedback into a howling, planet-wide deep freeze. The Earth wraps itself in a reflective armor, starving itself of the sun's warmth. Yet, this mirrored armor is not enough to plunge the world into the abyss of a 100,000-year glacial maximum. The ice albedo feedback is incredibly powerful, but it cannot operate in a vacuum. As the ice spreads and the winds shift, the true behemoth of the Earth's climate system begins to stir. The oceans, covering over 70% of the planet's surface and plunging to unfathomable, lightless depths, the oceans are about to swallow the very breath of the Earth, choking the atmosphere, and pulling the final trigger on the Ice Age. The oceans are not just bodies of water. They are the immense, churning thermal engine of the entire planet. They hold an almost incomprehensible amount of energy. Roughly 90% of all the heat in the Earth's climate system is locked away in the dark, crushing depths of the sea. If the atmosphere is the skin of our planet, the ocean is its deep, beating heart. And when the Ice Age begins, that heart slows down, fundamentally altering the chemistry of the world. When scientists looked at the microscopic bubbles trapped in the deepest ice cores from Antarctica, they found something that terrified them. It was a perfect, unbroken correlation. Whenever the global temperature plummeted and the ice sheet surged outward, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere vanished. During the warm interglacial periods, CO2 sat comfortably around 280 parts per million. But at the crushing peak of the last glacial maximum, the CO2 concentration collapsed, plunging to a suffocatingly low 180 parts per million. Carbon dioxide is a vital, invisible blanket that keeps the Earth from freezing solid in the black void of space. It traps the infrared heat radiated by the planet, creating the greenhouse effect. When the CO2 levels collapsed, the blanket was ripped away. The Earth began hemorrhaging heat into the cosmos, amplifying the freezing power of the expanding ice sheets to apocalyptic levels. But where did the carbon go? It did not just evaporate into space. It was swallowed by the oceans. The oceans are the ultimate carbon vault. They contain roughly 38,000 gigatons of carbon, nearly 50 times more than the entire atmosphere. And the ability of the ocean to hold this carbon is directly dictated by temperature. It is a simple, unyielding rule of chemistry. Cold water can dissolve significantly more gas than warm water. As the Milankovitch cycles cooled the northern hemisphere and the white mirror of the ice albedo feedback began dropping global temperatures, the surface of the oceans became brutally cold. As the water chilled, it became hungry. It began ripping carbon dioxide directly out of the sky. The colder the oceans got, the more CO2 they absorbed. The more CO2 they absorbed, the weaker the greenhouse effect became, which made the world even colder, which made the oceans even colder, which made them absorb even more CO2. It was a massive planetary death spiral. But this wasn't just a static chemical reaction at the surface. To truly bury the carbon, to hide it away so deeply that it cannot escape back into the atmosphere and warm the planet, the ocean had to move. It had to drag the carbon down into the abyss. This requires an understanding of a colossal, invisible river that flows silently beneath the waves. It is known as the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or the AMOC. It is the Great Ocean Conveyor Belt. Right now, massive amounts of warm, salty surface water flow continuously from the scorching tropics, sweeping northward past Europe and pushing deep into the freezing North Atlantic near Greenland. This tropical water is carrying an immense payload of heat, which is why northern Europe has a relatively mild climate instead of being a frozen tundra like regions at similar latitudes in Canada. But when this warm, salty river reaches the frigid waters near the Arctic, a dramatic transformation occurs. The surface water is blasted by the freezing Arctic winds. It loses its heat rapidly because it is highly salty, and because cold water is denser and heavier than warm water. This massive volume of ocean water suddenly becomes too heavy to stay on the surface. In an incredibly powerful, violent hydrodynamic action, millions of cubic meters of cold, dense water plummet downward. It sinks violently to the very bottom of the ocean floor, creating a deep, freezing, slow-moving current that crawls all the way back south toward the equator. This sinking action is the mechanism that buries the Earth's carbon. As the cold surface water absorbs the atmospheric CO2, the conveyor belt drags it down into the crushing pressure of the deep sea. The carbon is locked away in the abyssal plains miles beneath the surface, effectively removed from the climate system for thousands of years. During an ice age, however, this planetary heartbeat becomes erratic. The great conveyor belt slows down, stutters, and sometimes it completely collapses. As the massive Laurentide and Eurasian ice sheets grew, they held unimaginable volumes of fresh water. When the climate experienced even a slight, brief warming, or when the sheer weight of the ice caused massive subglacial lakes to burst, colossal armadas of icebergs and biblical floods occur. Freezing fresh water violently purged into the North Atlantic. Fresh water is significantly lighter than salty ocean water. When millions of gallons of fresh glacial meltwater slammed into the North Atlantic, it sat on top of the ocean like a lid. It diluted the salty current coming up from the tropics. Suddenly, the water wasn't dense enough to sink. The heavy, downward plunge of the ocean conveyor belt was physically choked off. The AMOC shut down. When the conveyor belt halts, the heat from the equator is no longer transported north. The entire northern hemisphere is suddenly starved of tropical warmth, violently plunging regions like Europe and North America into an abrupt, catastrophic deep freeze. Scientists have found evidence in the ice cores of events, known as Danskar-Oskar events, where temperatures in Greenland fluctuated wildly, rising or falling by as much as 10 degrees Celsius in a matter of mere decades. A blink of an eye in geological time. These terrifying, abrupt climate spasms were likely caused by the ocean conveyor belt violently flicking on and off, struggling under the chaotic influx of melting ice. It is a stunningly intricate machine. The slow, celestial waltz of Jupiter and Saturn alters the sunlight. The white ice reflects the heat. The freezing oceans swallow the carbon blanket. The great underwater rivers stall and collapse. This is the symphony of destruction that builds an ice age. And then, roughly 20,000 years ago, the cycle reversed. The orbital alignment shifted. The northern summers began to warm. The ice slowly started to sweat, then fracture, then melt. The oceans warmed, vomiting the trapped CO2 back into the atmosphere. The greenhouse effect reignited. The great thaw began. The retreat of the glaciers completely rearranged the face of the planet once again. Sea levels violently surged upward by over 100 meters, drowning coastlines, swallowing land bridges, and turning vast plains into shallow seas. The freezing tundra retreated northward, replaced by aggressive, expanding forests. But the end of the ice age was not a peaceful transition. It was an apocalypse. As the massive ice sheets rapidly collapsed, the environment transformed at a speed rarely seen in Earth's history. Global temperatures skyrocketed by 4 to 5 degrees Celsius in just a few thousand years. The climate became profoundly wetter and warmer. The endless, dry, freezing Mammoth Steppe, the most extensive and productive ecosystem on Earth, was physically destroyed. The cold-adapted grasses rotted away, replaced by invading forests, swamps, and entirely different vegetation. The giants that ruled this world suddenly found themselves starving in a rapidly shrinking habitat. The woolly mammoth, which required hundreds of kilograms of specific steppe grasses every single day just to survive, was suddenly trapped in muddy, unfamiliar forests. The dense, shaggy coats that protected the woolly rhinoceros from minus 40-degree winters became suffocating heat traps in the new, humid summers. Across the globe, the megafauna began to vanish. In North America, over 70% of all large animal species, creatures weighing more than 100 pounds, were wiped out completely. The towering mastodons, the terrifying short-faced bears, the armored glyptodonts, the massive giant ground sloths that could look a giraffe in the eye, gone. In Australia, the devastation was even worse, reaching near 90% extinction. The fossils simply stopped appearing in the dirt. It was a massive, sudden, and brutal biological purge. For a long time, scientists believed the violent, rapid climate change alone was responsible for killing the giants. The melting ice destroyed their home, and they simply could not adapt fast enough. But there is a darker, highly contested, and terrifying shadow lurking in the fossil record. Because right at the very moment the ice was melting, right as the megafauna were desperately struggling to survive in a collapsing ecosystem, a new, unprecedented predator was exploding across the continents. Homo sapiens, humans, armed with terrifying intelligence, fire, and highly evolved lethal technology. Around 16 to 20,000 years ago, human hunter-gatherers pushed across the frozen Bering Land Bridge from Asia into North America. They spread southward with astonishing speed, armed with a revolutionary weapon, the Clovis point. These were large, beautifully crafted, razor-sharp stone spearheads, specifically engineered to cause massive, catastrophic hemorrhaging in thick-skinned prey. We know they hunted the giants. Archaeologists have found the brutal evidence buried in the mud. Mammoth and mastodon skeletons bearing clear, undeniable cut marks from stone butchering tools. Rib cages with Clovis spear points still violently embedded deep within the bone. A single adult mammoth represented millions of calories, an impossible mountain of fat, meat, and bone marrow that could sustain a human tribe through the harshest conditions. Did human hunters massacre the megafauna, driving them to total extinction in a bloody wave of overhunting? Or did the violent, rapid climate change destroy the environment, starving the giants to death? The terrifying reality is likely a combination of both. The giants of the Ice Age were already staggering. Their populations were fractured, their food was disappearing, and their habitats were physically melting away beneath their feet. They were vulnerable. And into this collapsing, chaotic world stepped the most efficient, relentless apex predator the planet had ever produced. Humans applied the final, crushing pressure to an ecosystem that was already shattering. We didn't just survive the end of the Ice Age. We likely helped kill its greatest inhabitants. The last fragmented, isolated populations of woolly mammoths held out on a remote patch of land called Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean. They survived there until roughly 4,000 years ago. They finally died out right around the exact same time human beings were building the first Great Pyramids in Egypt. The Ice Age is over. We live in the warm, stable aftermath, the interglacial period known as the Holocene. It is a specific window of warmth and stability that allowed humanity to stop wandering, invent agriculture, build cities, and ultimately conquer the globe. But the Milankovitch Cycles have not stopped. Jupiter and Saturn are still pulling. The Earth is still wobbling. The massive astronomical clock is still ticking. According to the pure mathematics of the solar system, this warm period should eventually end. The orbit will shift, the northern summers will cool, and the ice should inevitably return. But when we look to the future, a terrifying, entirely unprecedented variable emerges. For 2.6 million years, the Earth's climate was controlled by massive, mindless physical forces, orbital mechanics, reflective ice, deep ocean currents. But today, the system has been hijacked. We are not just burning fossil fuels. We are ripping millions of years of stored, buried carbon out of the deep Earth and violently injecting it straight back into the atmosphere in the blink of a geological eye. Modern carbon dioxide levels have rocketed past 420 parts per million. The Earth has not experienced atmospheric conditions like this in over 3 million years, long before our species even existed. The heat blanket is thicker than it has ever been in human history. We are forcing the planet to retain massive amounts of solar energy. The oceans are rapidly warming, becoming more acidic, and losing their ability to hold oxygen. The great AMOC ocean conveyor belt is showing terrifying signs of instability and slowing down. The ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica are violently hemorrhaging meltwater into the rising seas. Some climate models, looking at the pure physics of the greenhouse effect, suggest something profoundly unsettling. The sheer volume of heat we have forced into the system may be so massive, so overpowering, that it could completely override the celestial mechanics of the Milankovitch Cycles. We may have pumped so much carbon into the sky that it will be physically impossible for the northern hemisphere to ever cool down enough to form ice sheets again. We may have literally canceled the next ice age. We are no longer living in the Holocene. We have entered a new, terrifying, and completely unknown epoch, the Anthropocene, the age of humanity. We are the first species in the multi-billion-year history of this planet to actively, knowingly seize control of the global climate system. We are not just a part of the Earth story anymore. We are writing the final chapters. The grand, astronomical rhythm of fire and ice that dictated the survival of life on Earth for millions of years has been broken. The Ice Age shaped us. It forged our intelligence and tested our endurance. But the next great planetary shift will not be driven by the slow orbit of the stars. It will be driven by us. And we are entirely in the dark. This has been Earth's documentary. Imagine holding a piece of solid water that is older than human civilization. It is freezing against your heavy insulated gloves, a fragile, sparkling cylinder pulled from 3 kilometers beneath the surface of the world. Inside this ice is the exact air breathed by a woolly mammoth. Inside this ice is the dust of a desert that vanished 100,000 years ago. Inside this ice is the blueprint of our planet's future. And if you know how to read it, it is screaming a warning. To truly grasp the sheer scale of the Ice Age, we have to step inside the freezing, highly sterile laboratories where scientists decode the ancient world. These are rooms kept artificially at minus 30 degrees Celsius, ensuring that the precious ice cores retrieved from Greenland and Antarctica do not lose a single molecule of their ancient integrity. When a section of an ice core is placed on a light table, it ceases to look like frozen water. It becomes a barcode of planetary history. Look closely at the ice. You will see faint, distinct bands, almost like the rings of a massively ancient tree. Each of these incredibly thin layers represents a single year of snowfall. By analyzing the trapped gases here, we can reconstruct the entire atmosphere of the deep past. But it is not just about the bubbles of greenhouse gases. The ice holds physical debris. In certain sections of the core, the pristine white and blue bands are suddenly interrupted by a dirty, opaque smear. The dust concentration jumps significantly at this depth. It is a violent, sudden influx of microscopic dirt. But this is not local dirt. This is the pulverized bedrock of continents thousands of miles away. When scientists cross-reference the exact depth of these heavy dust layers with astronomical models, a terrifying correlation emerges. The dust layers here correlate precisely with the obliquity cycle. When the Earth's axis tilted to its maximum of 24.5 degrees, the seasons became intensely violent. The summers grew scorching, and the winters plunged into an unimaginably deep freeze. The massive temperature contrasts birthed monstrous, continent-spanning storm systems. The planet was bleeding moisture, the oceans locking their water away in the growing ice sheets. The world dried out. Vast, sprawling deserts consumed the continents, and screaming, high-altitude winds ripped the dust from these new deserts, carrying across the globe until it rained down on the ice sheets. The dust in the ice is a physical remnant of a dying, drying ecosystem. But then, as you move your eye down the ice core, you notice something even more alarming. You note the shift in oxygen isotopes at a highly specific depth. Remember that the ratio of heavy oxygen, 18 to light oxygen, 16 acts as a perfect thermometer of the ancient world. For decades, scientists assumed that the climate changed at a glacial pace. They believed that it took tens of thousands of years for the world to warm up or cool down. Then, they found the Dansgaard-Oeschger events. Hidden in the densely packed layers of Greenland ice, The oxygen isotopes revealed an impossibility. The data showed that during the depth of the Ice Age, the global temperature did not just sit at a stable, freezing baseline. It violently, chaotically spiked. The isotopes indicate that temperatures in Greenland once rose by as much as 8 to 10 degrees Celsius within only a few decades. Think about what that means. In the span of a single human lifetime, less time than it takes for a person to grow old, the world convulsed. An 8 to 10 degree spike is an apocalyptic warming event. Rivers of meltwater would have instantly exploded from the ice sheets. The frozen tundra would have violently thawed, collapsing into massive swamps. The weather patterns of the entire northern hemisphere would have been thrown into utter chaos. And then, just as rapidly as the heat arrived, it vanished. The temperature dropped back into the abyss of the deep freeze. These massive temperature swings happened repeatedly. They were the climate system hyperventilating. And scientists realized that the trigger for these terrifyingly rapid shifts was not in the sky, but deep underwater. The ocean plays a crucial role in regulating our planet's temperature, with deep currents redistributing heat across the globe. This is the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. It acts as the great planetary thermostat. When it runs smoothly, it drags warm water north and pushes cold, dense water south, keeping the northern hemisphere relatively stable. But during the Ice Age, the sheer volume of fresh water sitting on land in the form of glaciers was a ticking time bomb. When the climate warmed just slightly, or when massive glacial dams broke, incomprehensible volumes of pure, freezing fresh water flooded the North Atlantic. Because fresh water is lighter and less dense than salt water, it formed a massive, impenetrable cap on the ocean surface. The heavy, salty water arriving from the equator hit this fresh water wall and was physically prevented from sinking. The conveyor belt snapped. The heat transport shut down instantly. And the moment the ocean stopped moving, the atmosphere panicked. The heat from the equator was trapped, while the northern latitudes were suddenly starved of all warmth. This hydrodynamic short circuit is what caused the violent 10-degree temperature swings in the Dansgaard-Oeschger events. It proves that the Earth's climate does not always change gracefully. When pushed past a tipping point, it snaps with lethal speed. Now, project this violent volatility onto the massive beast struggling to survive on the surface of the Mammoth Steppe. Imagine the woolly mammoth, an absolute titan of biological engineering. Weighing up to 6 tons, a single mammoth was a walking fortress of muscle, fat, and dense fur. They were perfectly designed for the cold, dry stability of the deep Ice Age. Their small ears and short tails prevented frostbite. Their massive, specialized molars could grind down the harsh, abrasive grasses of the frozen steppe. But when the climate began to violently swing, when the rapid warming periods hit, the mammoth's world disintegrated. The dry, firm grasslands turned to treacherous, bottomless mud. The specific grasses they needed to consume in massive quantities were suddenly outcompeted by toxic shrubs and sprawling forests. A beast that requires hundreds of kilograms of food a day cannot survive in a fundamentally transforming biome. And then, as if the suffocating heat and the vanishing food were not enough, a shadow fell across the steppe. The arrival of Homo sapiens in the Americas, pushing across the Bering Land Bridge between 16 and 20,000 years ago, introduced a predator the megafauna could not comprehend. These were not wolves or cave lions that could be intimidated by sheer size. These were highly coordinated pack hunters armed with the Clovis point. The Clovis spear point is a masterpiece of lethal prehistoric engineering, chipped from flint or obsidian. It featured a unique, fluted base that allowed it to be tightly lashed to a heavy wooden spear. When thrown with an otlotl, a spear thrower that acts as an extension of the human arm, this projectile could penetrate the impossibly thick hide of a mammoth. But the humans were not hunting for sport. A single adult mammoth represented an absolute jackpot of survival. 3 million calories. In a harsh, unforgiving world, 3 million calories meant the difference between life and death for an entire human group. It provided enough meat to feed a tribe for months. The thick fur provided essential clothing. The massive bones were used as a structural framework for shelters on the treeless plains. The fat was rendered down and burned as fuel for fires, keeping the freezing dark at bay. The pressure was absolute. The climate was destroying the mammoth's habitat from the bottom up, while highly intelligent human hunters were destroying their populations from the top down. It was a dual mechanism of extinction. The greatest megafauna the planet had ever seen disappeared from the fossil record in a geological heartbeat. Yet, against all odds, a tiny, isolated ghost population held on. Long after the great glaciers had retreated, long after the Mammoth Steppe was swallowed by the expanding oceans and forests, a small herd of woolly mammoths survived on Wrangel Island, a desolate speck of land completely cut off by the rising waters of the Arctic Ocean. They lived there for thousands of years, entirely alone, as the world moved on without them. They survived through the dawn of human agriculture. They survived as the first cities rose in Mesopotamia. They survived all the way until roughly 4,000 years ago. It is a staggering, haunting realization. While ancient humans in the blazing heat of the Egyptian desert were hauling massive blocks of limestone to construct the first Great Pyramids, the very last woolly mammoths on Earth were still walking to the Arctic snow, breathing their final breaths. Two entirely different epochs of Earth's history, overlapping in the same moment of time. The ice cores, the frozen bones, the microscopic dust, they all point to a single, unyielding truth. The Earth's climate is a vast, interconnected machine, and it is capable of unimaginable violence. For millions of years, this machine was operated by the slow, blind forces of orbital mechanics and oceanic currents. But today, we are the ones pulling the levers. We are mining the ancient, buried carbon and pumping it back into the atmosphere at a rate that dwarfs even the most extreme prehistoric volcanic eruptions. We are actively melting the remaining ice sheets. We are flooding the North Atlantic with fresh water, and terrifyingly, modern oceanographers are currently watching the Amosy Ocean conveyor belt, the very system that caused the violent Dansgaard-Oeschger climate spasms, showed distinct, measurable signs of slowing down. We are not separated from the deep history of the Ice Age. We are standing directly in its shadow, holding the power to trigger its most devastating mechanisms. Thank you for exploring the deep history of our planet with Earth's documentary. If this journey through the frozen past has changed how you view our world, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. The story of our planet is far from over, and we will be here to uncover it. Imagine a clock the size of a solar system. It is a machine of incomprehensible scale and precision, built out of the gravitational pull of gas giants, the tilt of a rocky planet, and the slow, deep currents of freezing oceans. For 2.6 million years, this clock has ticked with absolute, violent perfection. Tick, the world freezes. Vast ice sheets crush the continents. Tock, the world thaws. The oceans rise, and life flourishes in a brief, warm interlude. This has been the immutable law of our planet, a rhythm of fire and ice so powerful that it forged the very evolution of our species. But right now, in the span of a single biological heartbeat, a handful of sand has been thrown straight into the gears of this ancient machine. We are the sand, and we are currently watching the clock break in real time. Welcome back to Earth's documentary. As we journey further into the unknown, we are leaving the ancient past behind to confront the most terrifying mystery of all, the immediate future of a world that had forgotten how to freeze. To truly understand the unprecedented danger of the era we are living in right now, the Anthropocene, we have to look at the math. For millions of years, the Earth's climate was dictated by the Milankovitch Cycles. These orbital shifts operate on timescales of tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of years. They are incredibly powerful, but they are agonizingly slow. The Earth has time to react. The oceans have time to slowly absorb the carbon. The ecosystems have thousands of generations to slowly migrate toward the equator as the ice advances. But what humanity has done since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution defies the fundamental physics of the planet's history. We did not wait for the slow wobble of the Earth's axis. We bypassed the astronomical cycles entirely. In less than 250 years, a span of time so short it doesn't even register as a microscopic sliver in the geological record, we have extracted trillions of tons of buried, ancient solar energy in the form of coal, oil, and natural gas. This fossil fuel is essentially the compressed, ancient corpses of plants and marine life that absorbed the sun's energy hundreds of millions of years ago, long before the first ice age even began. By burning it, we have violently resurrected that ancient carbon and injected it straight into the modern atmosphere. When scientists look at the deepest ice cores from Antarctica, spanning 800,000 years of Earth's history, the carbon dioxide levels fluctuate perfectly in time with the ice ages. But in all that time, through multiple deep freezes and warm interglacials, the CO2 concentration never, ever breached 300 parts per million. That was the absolute ceiling of the natural climate system. Today, as you breathe in, the air filling your lungs has a carbon dioxide concentration of over 420 parts per million, and it is climbing vertically. We are not merely pushing the climate machine slightly out of balance. We have strapped a rocket engine to it. We are forcing a level of planetary warming that normally takes 100,000 years to occur, and we are doing it in the span of a few human lifetimes. This brings us to a terrifying realization about the ice albedo feedback. Remember, this is the planet's master amplification system. When the Earth cools, the white ice expands, reflecting sunlight and cooling the planet even faster. But this mechanism works in reverse with just as much violence. As the trapped greenhouse heat melts the Arctic sea ice, the pristine, highly reflective white surface is vanishing. It is being replaced by deep, dark, open ocean water. That dark water acts as a massive thermal battery, soaking up the blazing summer sun, trapping that heat and physically preventing the ocean from freezing over again in the winter. The mirror is shattering. The Arctic is currently warming nearly 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. We are watching the ice albedo feedback lock into a death spiral of heat. But the vanishing ice in the north is not just a tragedy for polar bears and walruses. It is actively pulling the trigger on a mechanism that could hurl the entire global climate into chaos. It all comes back to the Great Ocean Conveyor Belt, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. Deep in the ice core records, we saw the horrifying Dansgaard-Oeschger events. We saw that when prehistoric glacial lakes burst, flooding the North Atlantic with pure, freezing fresh water, the sudden drop in ocean density physically choked off the AMOC. The great underwater river stopped, and temperatures in the northern hemisphere violently crashed, swinging 10 degrees in a matter of decades. Today, modern oceanographers are staring at their satellite data and deep water sensors with growing dread. Because right now, the Greenland Ice Sheet, a colossal dome of ice containing enough water to raise global sea levels by over 7 meters, is rapidly melting. Every summer, millions of tons of pure, freezing fresh water are violently hemorrhaging off the edge of Greenland and pouring directly into the North Atlantic Ocean. We are artificially recreating the exact prehistoric conditions that caused the ocean conveyor belt to collapse in the deep past. And the warning signs are already flashing. If you look at a modern global temperature map, almost the entire planet is painted in angry reds and oranges, indicating severe warming. But just south of Greenland, right where the Great Ocean Conveyor Belt is supposed to plunge into the abyss, there's a stark, anomalous patch of deep blue. It is a patch of ocean that is actually getting colder. Scientists call it the cold blob. This is not a sign that global warming is a myth. It is the exact opposite. It is a fingerprint of a dying ocean current. The cold blob exists because the warm tropical waters that normally flow north to keep that region temperate are slowing down. The fresh meltwater from Greenland is sitting on top of the ocean, acting as a lid, preventing the heavy salt water from sinking. The AMOC is currently at its weakest point in over a millennium. If this colossal underwater circulation system completely collapses, as it did during the chaotic swings of the Ice Age, the consequences would be apocalyptic for modern civilization. Western Europe, deprived of equatorial heat, would be plunged into a brutal, unnatural deep freeze, even as the rest of the planet burns. The tropical rain belts, which provide life-saving monsoon rains to billions of people in South America, Africa, and Asia, will be violently dragged southward, triggering unprecedented droughts and mass starvation. The ocean's ability to absorb our excess carbon would be crippled, accelerating the greenhouse effect into the stratosphere. Yet, the rising oceans and the shifting currents are only the surface of the nightmare, because the ice does not just rule the water and the air. It rules the rock beneath our feet. When we talk about the ice caps melting, we generally focus on the coastlines drowning, but we forget the sheer, unimaginable weight of the ice itself. The ice sheet covering Antarctica is, on average, over 2 kilometers thick. The Greenland ice sheet is massive enough to exert its own gravitational pull on the ocean. For hundreds of thousands of years, the Earth's crust has been pressed down, buckled, and warped under the astronomical tonnage of these frozen continents. The tectonic plates beneath the ice are being held firmly in place by billions of tons of pressure. But what happens when you suddenly remove that weight? As the massive ice sheets rapidly melt and pour into the sea, the immense pressure on the bedrock is released. The Earth's crust is highly elastic over long periods. When the ice vanishes, the ground physically bounces back. This is a process known as isostatic rebound. It is happening right now. Parts of Scandinavia and North America are still slowly rising out of the sea, recovering from the weight of the last ice age 20,000 years ago. But as we accelerate the melting of modern ice sheets, we are rapidly unloading the crust. Deep beneath the bedrock of places like Iceland and Antarctica lie massive chambers of highly pressurized magma. For millennia, the crushing weight of the ice above has kept these subterranean volcanoes largely dormant, acting like a giant, heavy lid on a boiling pot. But as the ice melts, the lid is being lifted. The pressure on the crust drops. The deep magma chambers suddenly decompress. When magma decompresses, the dissolved gases trapped within it violently expand, exactly like opening a shaken bottle of soda. Geologists have found clear, terrifying evidence in the geological record. At the end of the last ice age, as the glaciers rapidly collapsed, the planet experienced a massive, global surge in cataclysmic volcanic eruptions and devastating earthquakes. By aggressively melting the polar ice caps, we are not just altering the weather, we are shifting the distribution of weight on the surface of the entire planet. We are waking up the fault lines. We are literally unbalancing the Earth. This forces us to confront a profound and deeply unsettling question. For 2.6 million years, the ice ages have come and gone. The planet enters a deep freeze, thaws, and then inevitably freezes again. According to the pure celestial mathematics of Milankovitch Cycles, the Earth should currently be on a slow, gentle downward glide toward the next great glaciation. Thousands of years from now, the ice should return to claim North America and Europe. But we have altered the chemistry of the skies so radically. We have trapped so much heat that many climatologists believe we have entirely overridden the astronomical clock. We have pushed the Earth past the point of no return. Even if we stopped emitting carbon tomorrow, the sheer volume of heat already absorbed by the deep oceans guarantees that the planet will continue to warm for centuries. We may have permanently canceled the next ice age. On a geological scale, humanity has become a force of nature as powerful as a massive asteroid impact or a continent-shattering supervolcano. We have ended the Pleistocene epoch. We have likely ended the Holocene. We have forced the planet into the Anthropocene, an era where the intelligence, greed, and technology of a single primate species dictate the future of the biosphere. But unlike an asteroid or a volcano, we are conscious. We are aware of the mechanisms. We have drilled into the ice, read the microscopic bubbles, and translated the warnings of the ancient world. We know exactly how the machine works, and we know exactly how to break it. The history of the Ice Age teaches us that the Earth is not a passive, stable rock. It is a highly sensitive, deeply interconnected system. It responds to the slightest nudge in its orbit with continent-crushing glaciers. It responds to a shift in ocean currents with violent 10-degree temperature swings. We are currently hitting this highly sensitive, violently reactive system with a sledgehammer. The Earth will survive. The planet has endured total glaciations, asteroid impacts, and mass extinctions. The rocks will remain. Life, in some form, will adapt. But the specific, beautifully fragile, temperate world that allowed human civilization to flourish, the world of predictable seasons, stable coastlines, and quiet oceans, that world is evaporating. We stand at the absolute pinnacle of human achievement, armed with the knowledge of the cosmos and the deep history of our frozen world. We know the rhythm of the ice. We know the power of the oceans. The only mystery left is what we decide to do next. Thank you for journeying through the monumental forces of our world with Earth's documentary. If this exploration of the past and the perilous edge of our future has expanded your perspective, please like, share, and subscribe. The story of our planet is being written right now, and we will be here to document every page. Look down at the ground beneath your feet. It does not matter if you are standing on the concrete pavement of a sprawling metropolis. the asphalt of a quiet suburban street, or the soft soil of a forest trail. Beneath that thin veneer of modern normality lies a graveyard of giants. You are walking on top of a lost world, a world that was violently erased from the face of the Earth not by an asteroid from space, but by the shifting rhythms of the planet itself. The ghosts of the Ice Age are everywhere, trapped in the bedrock, buried in the river valleys, and carved into the very shape of our continents. Welcome to Earth Documentary. Today, we are descending back into the freezing dark to resurrect the titans that once ruled our planet, to witness the brutal reality of their daily survival, and stand alongside the desperate, brilliant human hunters who watched their world melt away. To understand the sheer magnitude of what was lost at the end of the last ice age, we have to look closer at the world that sustained them. The term Ice Age is a bit of a deception. It conjures images of a planet entirely encased in a sterile, lifeless dome of smooth, white ice. But while the colossal Laurentide and Eurasian ice sheets were indeed sterile dead zones, pushing 3 kilometers into the sky, the land immediately south of them was not dead. It was supercharged. This was the Mammoth Steppe. It was an ecosystem that simply does not exist anywhere on Earth today. Imagine a vast, unbroken ocean of dry, cold grasslands stretching from the Atlantic coast of Europe all the way across the harsh expanses of Siberia, over the exposed Bering Land Bridge, and plunging deep into the heart of North America. It was the largest single biome the planet had ever produced. But this was no ordinary grass. The Mammoth Steppe was a paradoxical miracle of biology. Because the massive ice sheets locked up so much of the Earth's water, the global climate was brutally dry. Snowfall was surprisingly light in these regions. Instead, the air was filled with a relentless, biting wind that carried millions of tons of microscopic, mineral-rich dust. This dust, called lust, settled on the frozen plains like a hyperpotent fertilizer. During the brief, intense flash of the prehistoric summer, this heavily fertilized, well-drained soil exploded with life. It did not grow the soft, wet, nutrient-poor grasses we see in modern marshes or tropical plains. It grew a dense, aggressive, highly nutritious carpet of specialized arid grasses and herbs. This vegetation was essentially high-octane biological fuel. It was packed with proteins and complex carbohydrates, perfectly engineered by evolution to sustain the heaviest, most demanding land mammals in the history of the world. And the creatures that consumed this fuel were absolute monsters. We often focus on the woolly mammoth, and for good reason. They were the undisputed lords of the steppe. But they did not walk alone. They shared this frozen, dusty ocean with creatures that looked like they were pulled straight from the pages of dark fantasy. Imagine walking through the freezing mist of ancient Europe and seeing a silhouette emerge that defies all logic. The megaloceros, often called the Irish elk. Though it was neither exclusively Irish nor an elk, it was the largest species of deer to ever walk the earth. Standing over 2 meters tall at the shoulder, this magnificent beast carried a weaponized crown upon its head that is almost impossible to comprehend. The males possessed antlers that span up to 3.5 meters across, nearly 12 feet of solid, heavy bone. Every single year, the megaloceros had to shed and regrow these massive antlers. It was an astronomical biological cost. To grow that much bone in the span of a few short summer months required the animal to strip mine its own skeleton for calcium and consume massive quantities of the highly nutritious steppe grasses. These antlers were not just for show. They were brutal instruments of combat, used in violent, crushing clashes between males for dominance on the frozen plains. As you move further south, into the Americas, the cast of giants becomes even more bizarre and terrifying. In the shadows of the retreating ice, moving slowly through the prehistoric scrubland, was the megatherium, the giant ground sloth. Forget the small, slow-moving creatures hanging in the trees of the modern Amazon. The megatherium was the size of an African elephant. It weighed up to 4 tons. When it stood up on its massive, heavily muscled hind legs to strip the high branches of ancient trees, it towered over 6 meters in the air. It was armed with enormous, scythe-like claws that could easily shatter the spine of any predator foolish enough to attack it. And there were predators. The Mammoth Steppe was a landscape of constant, brutal warfare. Among the herds of ancient bison and wild horses stalked the ultimate assassin of the Pleistocene, Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat. Smilodon was not built like a modern lion or tiger. It was not a creature of long-distance chases or extended, graceful pursuit. It was built like a heavyweight wrestler. It had a massive, heavily muscled chest, thick, stocky forelimbs, and a shockingly short tail. It was designed for explosive, close-quarters ambushes. Its entire evolutionary purpose was to grapple massive, heavily armored prey to the ground, use its immense upper body strength to pin the struggling beast, and then deliver a single catastrophic strike with its iconic, blade-like canine teeth. Those teeth, serrated and fragile as struck against bone, were highly specialized surgical instruments designed to slice through the thick hides and sever the major arteries in the necks of juvenile mammoths, wild horses, and ground sloths. This was the delicate, brutal balance of the Ice Age, a world of extreme, specialized adaptations. Every creature, from the 6-ton mammoth to the ambush-hunting Smilodon, was perfectly tuned to a freezing, dusty, highly stable environment. But as we learn from the ice cores, the Earth's climate is not a gentle machine. It is capable of violent, chaotic spasms. When the Mid-Pleistocene Transition locked the planet into the crushing 100,000-year cycles of deep glaciation, the megafauna adapted. They grew larger to conserve body heat. They grew thicker fur. They specialized, but specialization is a dangerous evolutionary gamble. When you become perfectly adapted to one specific, extreme world, you become devastatingly vulnerable if that world ever decides to change. And roughly 20,000 years ago, the celestial gears shifted, the orbital eccentricity stretched, the axial tilt adjusted, and the northern summers began to receive just a fraction more solar radiation. The great white mirrors of the ice sheets began to sweat. The ocean conveyor belt stuttered and surged. The massive deep-sea vaults began to vomit their stored carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. The heat returned, and it returned with a vengeance. The end of the Ice Age was not a slow, gentle transition. It was an environmental apocalypse. The global average temperature surged by 4 to 5 degrees Celsius in a geological blink of an eye. For the giants of the Mammoth Steppe, this was an unmitigated disaster. The delicate, highly nutritious arid grasses that fueled their massive bodies could not survive the new humid heat. They rotted and died, rapidly replaced by encroaching forests, impenetrable scrublands, and toxic, nutrient-poor mosses. The ground itself, frozen solid for tens of thousands of years, began to thaw. The firm, dusty plains turned into treacherous, endless bogs of suffocating mud. Imagine a woolly mammoth, carrying massive layers of insulating fat and a thick coat of dark hair, suddenly subjected to scorching, humid summers. They were quite literally cooking alive in their own evolutionary armor. The megaloceros, requiring massive amounts of specific nutrients to grow its towering antlers, found itself starving in the new, expanding forest where its massive rack of bone constantly tangled in the dense branches. The giants were stumbling. Their world was dissolving beneath their feet. Their populations were fragmenting, retreating to the shrinking patches of the dying steppe. And it was in this exact moment of extreme planetary vulnerability, while the megafauna were battered, starving, and trapped in a collapsing ecosystem, that they came face to face with a new kind of monster, Homo sapiens. The crossing of the Bering Land Bridge by early human populations was not just migration. It was a biological invasion of unprecedented lethal efficiency. These were not primitive, bumbling cavemen. These were highly intelligent, fiercely adaptable, anatomically modern humans. They had complex languages, deep social structures, and most importantly, they possessed a capacity for rapid technological innovation. While the mammoth and the saber-toothed cat took millions of years to evolve their tusks and fangs, human beings could evolve their weapons in a single afternoon around a campfire. They carried the Clovis technology. It was a revolution in prehistoric ballistics, a beautifully flaked, razor-sharp point of stone that could be mass-produced, replaced when broken, and launched with devastating kinetic energy using a spear thrower. For the hunters stepping onto the massive plains of North and South America, the landscape must have seemed like a terrifying paradise. They were walking into a world entirely devoid of human presence, completely packed with millions of tons of slow-moving, heavily concentrated meat. The animals of the Americas had never seen a human being before. They had no evolutionary fear of these small, upright, hairless primates. They did not run. That lack of fear was a fatal mistake. The fossil record from this period is a crime scene. Across the Americas, paleontologists have unearthed the haunting evidence of the clash between human intellect and prehistoric mass. At sites scattered across the continent, we find the remains of slaughtered giants, mammoths with their ribs shattered by stone points, mastodon skulls bearing the undeniable, violent gouges of human butchery tools, entire herds driven off cliffs or trapped in muddy bogs, systematically dismantled for their meat, fat, and ivory. The efficiency of these early hunters was terrifying. They targeted the largest, most calorie-dense animals first. Why hunt 100 fast, elusive rabbits when a single, well-coordinated strike on a juvenile mammoth could provide millions of calories, enough to secure the survival of an entire community through the brutal winter? This dual pressure, the violent, rapid collapse of climate destroying the vegetation from the bottom up, combined with the relentless, intelligent predation of humans tearing the populations down from the top, created a perfect storm of extinction. The statistics are staggering, a biological massacre etched into the strata of the earth. In the Americas, approximately 72% of all megafauna species were violently wiped from existence. The towering ground sloths, the armored tanks of the plains, the massive short-faced bears that stood 12 feet tall, all gone. In Australia, the devastation was even more absolute, reaching roughly 88%. The Mammoth Steppe went quiet. The thundering footfalls of the giants ceased. The saber-toothed cats, deprived of their massive, slow-moving prey, starved to death in the shadows of the new forests. We are the survivors of this apocalypse. Our ancestors outsmarted the deep freeze, outhunted the apex predators, and adapted to the violently shifting climate. But the victory came at an immeasurable cost. We inherited a world that had been emptied of its titans. Yet, the Ice Age did not just leave behind bones. It left behind the very shape of the modern world. The monumental ice sheets that crushed North America and Europe did not just sit there, they moved. They were colossal, grinding rivers of solid ice, flowing under their own unimaginable weight. As they expanded and retreated, they acted like planetary-scale bulldozers. They ripped the tops off mountains. They gouged massive, deep scars into the continental bedrock. When the global climate warmed and the Great Thaw began, the sheer volume of water released was biblical. As the Laurentide Ice Sheet collapsed, it carved the massive basins that we now call the Great Lakes. It redirected entire continental river systems. The Mississippi River was forged into a roaring, continent-draining superhighway by the endless torrents of glacial meltwater. Valleys that were once shallow streams were violently ripped open into deep, U-shaped canyons by the retreating ice. Every time you look at a map of the Northern Hemisphere, you are looking at the architectural blueprint drafted by the Ice Age. The rich, fertile soils of the American Midwest and the plains of Eastern Europe, the very soils that currently grow the grain that feeds billions of human beings today, were ground down from solid rock by the crushing weight of the glaciers and blown across the continents by the violent, freezing winds of the Pleistocene. We are a species born of the ice. Our bodies, our societies, our entire agricultural foundation are perfectly calibrated to the warm, stable aftermath of the deep freeze. We rely on the rivers it carved. We plant our crops in the dirt it pulverized. But as we learn from the terrifying data locked deep within the ancient ice cores, stability on this planet is an illusion. The Earth's climate is a sleeping giant, governed by the slow wobble of the planet and the deep, dark currents of the sea. For 2.6 million years, that giant woke up every 100,000 years to bury the world in ice. It operated on a celestial schedule that was absolute and unbreakable. Until now, by digging up the ancient, buried carbon and violently releasing it back into the sky, we have broken the astronomical clock. We have taken the controls of the planetary thermostat. We are rapidly melting the last remaining fortresses of ice in Greenland and Antarctica. We are choking the deep ocean currents with fresh water, flirting with the exact same mechanisms that cause the violent, chaotic climate spasms of the deep past. We looked at the extinction of the megafauna and assumed that because we survived the end of the Ice Age, we were the masters of the Earth. We assumed our intelligence made us immune to the violently shifting mechanics of the planet. But the ice cores tell a different story. They tell us that the Earth does not care about our intelligence. It only responds to physics. It responds to carbon. It responds to heat. We have ended the era of the ice. We have ushered in the Anthropocene. We are now the most powerful geological force on the planet, capable of altering the atmosphere faster than a supervolcano and shifting the weight of the continents by melting the poles. The Mammoth Steppe is gone. The Titans are dead, but the immense invisible machinery of the Earth's climate system is still running. And right now, we are blindly pushing its most dangerous levers. This has been Earth's Documentary. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the lost world of the Pleistocene. If you found this journey to the frozen past and into the uncertain future compelling, please share, and subscribe. The history of our planet is the most terrifying and beautiful story ever told, and we will continue to uncover it together. To truly comprehend the resilience of our species, we must strip away every single comfort of the modern world. Turn off the central heating. Erase the insulated homes of brick and steel. Remove the synthetic winter coats engineered in modern laboratories. Now, place yourself in the middle of a Eurasian plain 20,000 years ago, during the absolute crushing zenith of the last glacial maximum. The sun has just set. The temperature is plummeting past minus 40 degrees Celsius. The wind, carrying microscopic shards of ice and abrasive lush dust, is howling across a landscape completely devoid of trees to block its fury. In this environment, exposed human skin freezes solid in a matter of minutes. Hypothermia is not a slow, gentle sleep. It is a rapid, violent, systemic shutdown of the human body. Yet, in this freezing hellscape, humanity did not just survive. We thrived. We conquered the cold. And the way we did it reveals the true, terrifying power of the human mind, a power that would eventually allow us to seize control of the entire planetary climate. While the giant megafauna relied on millions of years of slow, blind evolution to grow thick fur and layers of blubber, Homo sapiens relied on rapid, conscious engineering. We could not grow our own fur, so we violently took it from the creatures that could. But simply draping a raw mammoth or wolf hide over your shoulders is not enough to survive a Pleistocene winter. The freezing wind will find the gaps. The body heat will bleed out. To truly conquer the Ice Age, early humans had to invent a piece of technology so profoundly revolutionary that it ranks alongside the discovery of fire and the invention of the wheel. It was a tiny, fragile sliver of bone, pierced with a microscopic hole at one end, the eyed needle. This minuscule invention, carved from the ivory of a mammoth tusk or the bone of an ancient reindeer, changed the trajectory of our species forever. It allowed human beings to sow. For the first time in the history of the planet, a creature could manufacture highly fitted, airtight, multi-layered, tailored clothing. They engineered specialized garments, inner layers of soft, moisture-wicking hair, fur worn against the skin, and outer layers of heavy, weatherproof wolf or bear hide. They crafted insulated boots and tightly fitted hoods. With the eyed needle, humans effectively created artificial microclimates around their bodies. We built wearable, heated atmospheres. But clothing was only half the battle. They needed shelter. Out on the Mammoth Steppe, there were no caves to hide in. There were no forests to chop down for timber. The landscape was an endless ocean of grass and ice. So, the early humans looked at the massive, skeletal remains of the titans they hunted, and they saw building materials. In places like modern-day Ukraine and Russia, archaeologists have unearthed something that defies belief. Monumental, highly engineered architecture constructed entirely out of the bones of woolly mammoths. These were not simple, hastily assembled lean-tos. These were massive geometric domes. The builders used massive mammoth skulls as heavy foundation blocks, interlocking their jaws for structural stability. They used the towering, curved tusks to form the arched, weight-bearing roof supports. They draped the entire structure in heavy hides, sealing out the deadly wind. Inside these bone fortresses, they burned mammoth fat for heat and light. Imagine sitting inside a glowing dome constructed from the skeletons of 6-ton monsters, protected from a lethal minus 40-degree blizzard raging outside. This was the ultimate triumph of human intellect over the brutal mechanics of the Milankovitch Cycles. We did not adapt our biology to the Ice Age. We forced the environment to adapt to us. We became the ultimate invasive species, capable of surviving in the most hostile, extreme biome on the planet. But to truly respect the enemy our ancestors faced, we must understand what ice actually is. We think of ice as merely frozen water, fragile, brittle, something you put in a glass to cool a drink. But on a planetary scale, ice is a completely different substance. It is a rock, and under unimaginable pressure, it becomes a monster. When snow accumulates over tens of thousands of years, as it did to form the Laurentide Ice Sheet, the sheer, crushing weight of the layers above physically alters the crystalline structure of the ice deep below. At a depth of roughly 50 meters, the pressure becomes so immense that the ice stops being a brittle solid. It begins to deform. It becomes plastic. It begins to flow. A glacier is not a stationary block of frozen water. It is an unimaginably heavy, slow-moving river of highly abrasive rock. As this plastic ice flows outward from its center, pushed relentlessly by the weight of new snow falling on its dome, it grips the bedrock beneath it with terrifying friction. It acts like a planetary belt sander. It plucks up massive boulders, some the size of houses, and drags them for hundreds of miles, using them as grinding teeth to gouge deep, violent striations into the continental crust. The surface of these ice sheets is a chaotic, lethal wasteland, because the upper layers of the ice are not under the same extreme pressure as the deep ice. They remain brittle. As the glacier flows over uneven terrain, this brittle surface violently fractures, ripping open massive, plunging chasms known as crevasses. Some of these blue, lightless abysses are hundreds of feet deep, hidden beneath thin, deceptive bridges of wind-blown snow. But the most terrifying and powerful mechanism of the ice sheet is hidden entirely out of sight, locked miles beneath the surface, where the crushing weight of the glacier meets the solid bedrock of the Earth. Underneath 3 kilometers of solid ice, the pressure is so astronomically high that it lowers the melting point of water. Combined with the faint geothermal heat radiating up from the Earth's core, this causes the very bottom of the ice sheet to melt. This creates a highly pressurized subglacial plumbing system. Massive, dark lakes of liquid water form miles beneath the ice, completely isolated from the surface of the planet for millions of years. This subglacial water acts as a high-pressure lubricant. When a massive volume of meltwater accumulates beneath an ice sheet, it physically lifts the billions of tons of ice above it slightly off the bedrock. Suddenly, the brutal friction holding the glacier in place vanishes. The ice sheet begins to violently slide. This is known as a glacial surge. During the last glacial maximum, these surges were catastrophic. The Laurentide Ice Sheet would suddenly lurch forward, pushing massive lobes of grinding ice deeper into North America at terrifying speeds. And when these highly lubricated, fast-flowing ice streams reached the ocean, the destruction multiplied. This brings us to the most vulnerable, fragile fracture point in the modern climate system. It is a place where the deep ocean currents, the physics of melting ice, and the rising global temperatures are currently locked in a catastrophic collision, thousands of miles away from the vanished Mammoth Steppe. Clinging to the frozen underbelly of the Earth is the West Antarctic Ice Sheet. This is not a floating sheet of sea ice. It is a colossal, solid dome of fresh water resting on top of a submerged archipelago. And at the very edge of this ice sheet lies a monstrous formation known as the Thwaites Glacier. Scientists have given it a much darker, much more accurate name. They call it the Doomsday Glacier. Thwaites is massive, roughly the size of Great Britain or the state of Florida. It acts as a colossal, frozen cork, physically holding back the terrifying volume of the entire West Antarctic ice sheet from sliding into the ocean. If Thwaites collapses, it will unbottle enough ice to raise global sea levels by over 3 meters. That is not a gradual, manageable rise. That is a complete, violent drowning of every major coastal city on the planet. And Thwaites is currently dying from the bottom up. Because we have pumped the atmosphere full of heat-trapping carbon dioxide, the oceans have absorbed 90% of that excess thermal energy. Deep, warm ocean currents are being pushed southward toward Antarctica. Because the Thwaites Glacier rests on bedrock that is actually below sea level, this warm, aggressive ocean water is penetrating deep beneath the ice. It is flowing into the dark, crushing space between the bedrock and the bottom of the glacier. It is melting the ice from below, violently attacking the exact points where the glacier is pinned to the rock. As it melts these crucial anchor points, the grounding line, the exact boundary where the ice detaches from the rock and begins to float, is rapidly retreating inland. As the grounding line retreats, more the glacier is exposed to the warm water, accelerating the melting in a terrifying, self-amplifying feedback loop. The glacier is losing its grip. Satellite imagery shows massive, expanding networks of violent fractures ripping across the surface of Thwaites as the structural integrity of the ice rapidly disintegrates. We are watching the mechanics of a prehistoric Dansgaard Oshker event unfold in high-definition, real-time satellite data. When Thwaites eventually shatters and releases its grip, the massive influx of fresh water and ice into the Southern Ocean will fundamentally alter global sea levels and oceanic currents in a way humanity has never recorded. This is the ultimate, terrifying paradox of our species. The same brilliant, relentless intellect that invented the eyed needle to survive the freezing winds of Pleistocene, the same mind that engineered mammoth bone fortresses to defy the Ice Age, has now engineered a world that is physically dismantling the planetary climate system. We outsmarted the cold, but in doing so, we unlocked the heat. And the heat is an entirely different kind of monster. For millions of years, the Earth has oscillated between deep glacial periods and brief, mild interglacials. But if we look much deeper into the geological record, far beyond the 800,000-year limit of the ice cores, far beyond the 2.6 million-year history of the current Ice Age epoch, we find a planet that we would barely recognize. We find the hothouse Earth. Roughly 50 million years ago, during a period known as the Eocene, there was absolutely no permanent ice on this planet. None. Antarctica was completely covered in dense, lush, temperate rainforests. Palm trees grew in Alaska, massive. Prehistoric crocodiles hunted in the swamps of the high Arctic. The oceans were wildly elevated, swallowing massive portions of the continents. The global temperature was radically higher, completely saturated with naturally occurring greenhouse gases. The Earth is perfectly capable of existing in a state of extreme, ice-free heat. The planet does not require ice to survive. The planet does not require a stable coastline. The planet does not require us. The terrifying reality is that by rapidly digging up the buried carbon from hundreds of millions of years ago, we are forcefully dragging the Earth's atmosphere backward in time. We are recreating the chemical conditions of the Eocene hothouse, but we are doing it at a speed that defies all biological adaptation. The megafauna of the Mammoth Steppe went extinct because a shift of 4 degrees over several thousand years violently unraveled their ecosystem. They could not adapt to the rapidly changing vegetation. They could not outrun the changing weather. We are currently on track to match that temperature shift in a matter of centuries. We are physically forcing the planetary clock to run backward, rapidly unwinding the massive, intricate cooling system that took millions of years to build. We are blinding the great white mirrors of the poles. We are suffocating the deep ocean currents. The Ice Age forged our bodies, our minds, and our civilization. The deep, crushing cold of the glacial periods taught us how to cooperate, how to engineer, how to survive the impossible. But the stable, warm interglacial period, the Holocene, is what allowed us to stop fighting for simple survival and start building a globally interconnected civilization. Our cities, our ports, our massive agricultural networks, they are all perfectly, rigidly bolted to the exact sea level, the exact rainfall patterns, and exact seasonal temperatures of the world right now. We are just as highly specialized to this current climate as the woolly mammoth was to the frozen steppe. And just like the mammoth, our world is beginning to melt beneath our feet. The ancient ice, holding the memories of a frozen earth, is screaming its warning as it shatters into the warming sea. To comprehend the true peril of our current century, we must first confront the dangerous illusion of human memory. We look back at our recorded history, the rise of Rome, the construction of the pyramids, the birth of modern industry, and we think we're looking at a vast, expansive timeline. But in the grand, terrifying scale of geological time, the entire history of human civilization is nothing more than a momentary, fleeting spark. We suffer from a species-wide amnesia. We assume that the climate we live in today is the permanent default state of the planet. It is not. We are living inside a microscopic anomaly. Welcome to Earth's documentary. Today, we are breaking the illusion of permanence to understand why the end of the Ice Age was not just a change in the weather, but the singular event that allowed humanity to conquer the globe. To understand why civilization exists at all, we have to look at the terrifying volatility of the deep past. During the 100,000-year grip of the last glacial maximum, human beings were anatomically identical to us. They had the exact same brains, the exact same capacity for language, and the exact same potential for complex mathematics and engineering. So why didn't they build cities on the Mammoth Steppe? Why didn't they invent agriculture while hunting the woolly rhinoceros? Why did humanity spend over 200,000 years wandering the plains as nomadic hunter-gatherers, only to suddenly, explosively build global civilizations in the last 10,000 years? We did not suddenly become smarter. The planet simply stopped trying to kill us. The Ice Age was not just brutally cold. It was violently, impossibly chaotic. The Dansgaard-Oeschger events, the sudden 10-degree temperature swings that occurred in the span of a single generation, made agriculture physically impossible. Imagine trying to settle down and plant a massive crop of wild wheat. You build permanent shelters. You rely on harvest. And then the ocean conveyor belt stutters. Within 20 years, the average temperature violently crashes. Your crops die in the frozen soil. Your community starves. In a chaotic, rapidly shifting climate, being stationary is a death sentence. To survive the Ice Age, humanity had to remain light, mobile, and utterly adaptable. We had to follow the migrating herds because the plants could not be trusted. But roughly 10,000 years ago, the massive ice sheets finally retreated. The massive influxes of fresh meltwater into the ocean ceased. The global temperature rose, and then miraculously it flatlined. The climate stopped swinging. The chaotic, violent heart of the planet settled into a steady, predictable, unprecedented rhythm. The seasons became reliable. The monsoons arrived exactly when they were supposed to. The winters were cold, but no longer apocalyptic. The summers were warm and lasted long enough to grow food. This narrow, beautiful, 10,000-year window of profound climatic stability is known as the Holocene. It is the greatest anomaly in the recent history of the Earth, and it is the only reason you are alive today. Because the climate stabilized, the plants stabilized. Because the plants stabilized, human beings realized they no longer had to chase mammoths across a freezing tundra. We could stay in one place. We could put seeds in the ground, and we could trust with absolute certainty that the stable Holocene climate would allow them to grow. Agriculture was born, and with agriculture came surplus food. With surplus food came permanent settlements, explosive population growth, the division of labor, the invention of writing, the forging of steel, and the splitting of the atom. Everything we have ever built is entirely predicated on the absolute stability of the Holocene climate. But as we have seen from the deep ice cores, stability on this planet is never permanent. It is a fragile equilibrium, constantly balancing on the razor's edge between the deep freeze and the hothouse. By violently unearthing millions of years of stored carbon and burning it into the atmosphere, we are not just warming the planet, we are shattering the very stability that allowed us to build our world. We are pushing the global temperature completely out of the narrow, safe bandwidth of the Holocene. And as we push the planet out of this stable state, we are waking up ancient, sleeping monsters hidden deep within the frozen earth. Monsters that are far more terrifying than any predator of the Pleistocene. We have already witnessed the lethal power of the ice albedo feedback, how melting the white, reflective ice of the Arctic exposes a dark, heat-absorbing ocean, accelerating the warming of the planet. But as the heat moves inland, away from the melting sea ice, it strikes the vast, desolate plains of Siberia, Alaska, and northern Canada. This is the permafrost. It is a massive layer of soil, rock, and organic material that has remained completely, solidly frozen for tens of thousands of years. It covers nearly a quarter of the entire northern hemisphere. During the last glacial maximum, the permafrost was a solid foundation of the Mammoth Steppe. When the megafauna died, when the massive, nutrient-rich grasses were buried, they did not decompose. They froze. The permafrost is essentially a planetary-scale freezer, locking away the organic remains of millions of years of life. But the freezer is failing. The power has been cut. As the Arctic warms at 4 times the rate of the rest of the globe, the permafrost is violently thawing. The solid ground is collapsing, creating massive, sunken craters and churning mud bogs. Whole forests in the north are tilting and falling over, known as drunken trees, because the frozen foundation beneath them is turning to mush. But the physical collapse of the landscape is not the true danger. The nightmare lies in the chemistry. As the permafrost thaws, the millions of tons of ancient, frozen organic matter, the roots, the dead plants, the crushed bones of the Ice Age, are suddenly exposed to liquid water and oxygen. They begin to violently rot. Unimaginable swarms of microbes wake up in the thawing mud and begin to feast on the ancient decay. As these microbes digest the organic matter, they excrete massive volumes of gas. If the soil is relatively dry, they release carbon dioxide. But if the ground is waterlogged, turning into vast, oxygen-starved swamps, a different kind of microbe takes over. And they do not breathe out carbon dioxide. They breathe out methane. Methane is a greenhouse gas of terrifying potency. Over a 20-year period, a single molecule of methane is over 80 times more effective at trapping solar heat than a molecule of carbon dioxide. It is a hyperaccelerant for planetary warming. And the permafrost contains an estimated 1.5 trillion tons of frozen carbon. That is twice as much carbon as is currently floating in the entire Earth's atmosphere. We are standing on the precipice of a massive, unstoppable feedback loop. It is a terrifying equation. Human emissions warm the Arctic. The warm Arctic thaws the permafrost. The thawing permafrost violently exhales billions of tons of highly potent methane into the sky. The methane traps more heat. The heat thaws more permafrost. This is what climatologists refer to as a tipping point. It is the moment when human beings are no longer the primary drivers of climate change. It is the moment when the Earth's own internal systems take over, feeding on their own destruction. Once the permafrost begins a runaway thaw, it will not matter if humanity completely shuts down every single factory, every power plant, and every combustion engine on the planet. The Earth will continue to violently warm itself, driven by the massive, rotting ghosts of the Ice Age. We are dangerously close to crossing that line. In the high Arctic, scientists are already observing massive, explosive craters ripping open in the Siberian tundra, caused by pockets of highly pressurized methane violently detonating as the permafrost weakens. We are watching the frozen vaults of the Earth forcefully burst open. This is the ultimate legacy of the Ice Age. The massive glaciers ground the rocks into soil. The freezing winds created the Mammoth Steppe. The chaotic climate forced our ancestors to become the most adaptable, intelligent creatures on the planet. An extreme cold locked away trillions of tons of carbon in the deep ocean and the northern ice. The Ice Age built a highly pressurized, perfectly balanced machine. And then the climate stabilized just long enough for one incredibly clever species to figure out how to dig up the fuel, light the fire, and blind the cooling systems. We are not destroying the Earth. The Earth is a massive ball of iron, rock, and water. It will survive the Anthropocene just as it survived the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. The Earth has infinite patience. If we push the climate into a violent, uninhabitable hothouse, the planet will simply wait. It will wait for the excess carbon to slowly absorb back into the rocks over millions of years. It will wait for the continents to shift. It will wait for the slow, inevitable orbital pull of Jupiter and Saturn to bring the cold back. What we are destroying is the Holocene. We are destroying the incredibly rare, incredibly fragile 10,000-year window of stability that allowed us to stop running. We are dismantling the only climate that human civilization has ever known. The ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica are not just records of a dead past. They are a mirror. They show us the terrifying power of a planet that is entirely indifferent to our survival. They show us that when the climate decides to shift, it does not do so gently. It shifts with the violence of collapsing ice sheets, dying oceans, and choking skies. We have the intelligence to read the ice. We have the technology to understand the orbital mechanics. We have mapped the deep currents of the sea. We are the first species in the history of the universe with the ability to foresee our own planetary crisis. The ancient clock is ticking, but we are holding the gears. Thank you for confronting the deep time and fragile future of our planet with Earth's documentary. If this journey to the frozen archives of the Earth has changed your understanding of our world, please like, share, and subscribe. The story of our climate is the most urgent story ever told, and we will be here to decode every terrifying and beautiful chapter. Deep beneath the crushing weight of the world's oceans, in the lightless, freezing abyss where no human could ever survive, there's a substance that defies all logic. It rests on the continental shelves, buried under thick layers of deep-sea mud. To the naked eye, it looks like ordinary, harmless ice, just translucent, fragile chunks of frozen water. But if you were to bring a piece of this ice to the surface and touch a match to it, the ice would not just melt, it would burst into a violent, roaring flame. You are looking at frozen fire. It is a biological time bomb, forged in the deep past, and it holds the power to shatter the global climate beyond repair. Welcome to Earth's documentary. Today, we are plunging into the dark, crushing depth of the oceans to uncover the terrifying chemical chain reactions that are waking up beneath the waves, and to witness the true apocalyptic cost of a warming world. To understand the frozen fire, we have to follow the carbon. We know that on land, the melting permafrost is violently exhaling millions of tons of methane into the atmosphere. But the land is not the only place the Earth has hidden its ancient carbon. The oceans have their own, vastly larger and vastly more dangerous vault. It is called methane clathrate or methane hydrate. For millions of years, as organic matter, dead plankton, microscopic sea creatures, algae, drifted down into the lightless depths of the ocean, it was buried in the seafloor sediment. As bacteria slowly consumed this organic rain, they released immense amounts of methane gas. Normally, this gas would bubble up to the surface and enter the atmosphere. But the deep ocean is an alien, extreme environment. The water temperature hovers just above freezing, and the physical pressure of miles of water pressing down from above is astronomical. Under these exact conditions of extreme cold and crushing pressure, physics does something miraculous. The water molecules physically trap the methane molecules inside microscopic, crystalline cages. The gas is frozen solid into the ice itself. It becomes a clathrate. This frozen fire lines the continental margins of almost every landmass on the planet, and the sheer volume of energy trapped in this deep-sea ice is staggering. Scientists estimate that there is more carbon locked in oceanic methane clathrates than in all the remaining fossil fuel reserves, all the oil, all the coal, all the natural gas, on the entire Earth combined. It is a sleeping dragon made of carbon, resting silently in the dark. For the entirety of human history, and for millions of years of the ice age cycles, this dragon has remained dormant. The cold oceans and immense pressure kept the icy cages locked tight. But the oceans are no longer cold. As humanity continues to pump carbon dioxide into the sky, the atmosphere traps the solar heat. But the atmosphere is thin. It cannot hold all that energy. Over 90% of the excess heat trapped by our greenhouse gases has been physically absorbed by the oceans. The sea is acting as a massive thermal sponge, protecting us from the true severity of the warming we have caused. But a sponge can only hold so much. The oceans are heating up, and that heat is slowly, relentlessly creeping downward into the abyss. When warm ocean currents wash over the continental shelves, they alter the delicate thermodynamic balance of the seafloor. The extreme pressure remains, but the extreme cold vanishes. And when the water warms by just a few degrees, the crystalline cages of the methane clathrates become unstable. They shatter. The ice violently turns back into a gas. This terrifying scenario is known among scientists as the clathrate gun hypothesis. It suggests that once the ocean warms past a critical threshold, massive deposits of frozen methane will simultaneously destabilize. The gas will violently erupt from the seafloor, ripping through the water column in colossal, boiling plumes, and vent directly into the atmosphere. Because methane is over 80 times more potent at trapping heat than carbon dioxide in the short term, the fire in the clathrate gun would trigger a catastrophic, runaway warming event. The heat would spike, melting more clathrates, releasing more methane, generating more heat, in an unstoppable planetary-scale detonation of the greenhouse effect. We do not have to guess what this looks like. The Earth has already fired this gun before. 56 million years ago, long before the ice ages, the planet experienced a cataclysmic event known as the Paleocene thermal maximum, or the PTM. In a remarkably short period of geological time, a massive, mysterious injection of carbon flooded the atmosphere. Many scientists believe this ancient carbon spike was triggered by massive volcanic eruptions that baked vast deposits of fossil fuels. which in turn warmed the oceans enough to detonate the deep-sea methane clathrates. The results were apocalyptic. Global temperatures skyrocketed by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. The oceans became scalding hot, even at the poles. But the true horror of the PTM was not just the heat. It was what the carbon did to the chemistry of the water itself. When we talk about human carbon emissions, we almost exclusively talk about global warming. We focus on the rising air temperatures, the melting glaciers, the shifting weather patterns. But there's a silent, invisible, and equally lethal consequence of pumping massive amounts of CO2 into the air. Scientists call it the evil twin of global warming. Ocean acidification. The oceans are the lungs of the Earth. They constantly breathe in and breathe out gases from the atmosphere. When the concentration of carbon dioxide in the sky rises, the ocean is physically forced to absorb more of it to maintain chemical equilibrium. But when carbon dioxide dissolves in seawater, it does not just sit there, it reacts. The CO2 violently combines with the water molecules to form carbonic acid. This process actively floods the ocean with hydrogen ions, lowering the pH of the water, making it fundamentally more acidic. In the last 200 years, the surface waters of the global ocean have become roughly 30% more acidic. That is a chemical shift occurring at a speed that the planet has not witnessed in tens of millions of years. Why does this matter? Because the entire foundation of the oceanic food web is built on a single, highly vulnerable chemical compound, calcium carbonate. Countless marine organisms, from a massive, sprawling coral reefs that house a quarter of all marine life, to microscopic, free-floating sea snails known as pteropods, rely on calcium carbonate to build their shells and skeletons. To construct these protective armors, they must extract carbonate ions directly from the surrounding seawater. But as the ocean becomes more acidic, the excess hydrogen ions bond with the carbonate ions, effectively stealing them away. The building blocks of life are chemically locked up. The corals and the microscopic plankton are suddenly starved of materials they need to survive. If the ocean becomes acidic enough, the nightmare scenario unfolds. The water actually becomes corrosive to calcium carbonate. The shells of living organisms begin to physically dissolve while they are still alive. Under a microscope, scientists have already documented the devastating effects. Pteropods, tiny, beautiful sea snails that are a crucial food source for everything from krill to massive baleen whales, are being pulled from modern oceans with shells that are pitted, scarred, and dissolving into nothingness. They are slowly burning in an acid bath of our own making. If the microscopic base of the food web collapses, the entire oceanic ecosystem collapses with it. The fish starve, the marine mammals die, the coral reefs, the vibrant, teeming rainforests of the sea, bleach bone white and crumble into dead, silent rock. And the death of the ocean is not just a tragedy for marine life. It is an existential threat to humanity itself. Microscopic marine organisms, specifically phytoplankton, do not just feed the oceans. They breathe for the planet. Through the process of photosynthesis, these invisible, floating forests generate roughly 50% of all the oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere. Every second breath you take is manufactured by the ocean. By acidifying the seas, by detonating the deep carbon vaults, we are not just warming the planet. We are systematically suffocating the lungs of the world. During the ancient PTM, when a clathrate gun fired and the oceans violently acidified, the deep sea experienced a massive global extinction event. Entire lineages of deep sea organisms were wiped from the fossil record, completely dissolved by the toxic water. It took the planet over 100,000 years to slowly process the excess carbon and return to a stable equilibrium. But the terrifying difference between the PTM and today is the speed of the injection. 56 million years ago, the massive influx of carbon was released over a period of thousands of years. Today, human civilization is burning through billions of tons of fossilized carbon in a matter of decades. We are injecting the poison into the Earth's bloodstream at a rate roughly 10 times faster than the catastrophic events of the PTM. We are outrunning the planet's ability to heal. And as the oceans acidify, warm, and expand, they are fundamentally redrawing the map of the Earth. We must let go of the map we were taught in school. The familiar shapes of the continents, the boot of Italy, the curve of the American eastern seaboard, the sprawling delta of Bangladesh, are not permanent fixtures of the Earth. They are merely a snapshot. They are the temporary result of exactly where the sea level happened to rest during the brief 10,000-year stability of the Holocene. But the sea level is not static. It is a direct, physical expression of the planet's temperature. There are two massive, unstoppable engines currently driving the oceans higher. The first is thermal expansion. As the ocean absorbs the trapped greenhouse heat, the water physically expands. The molecules move faster, pushing further apart, requiring more volume. Even if not a single drop of glacial ice melted, the oceans would still rise simply because they are getting warmer. But the ice is melting, and that is the second, far more terrifying engine. We have discussed the Doomsday Glacier in Antarctica, the fragile cork holding back a 3-meter rise. We have discussed the Greenland Ice Sheet, bleeding millions of tons of pure fresh water into the North Atlantic, carrying potential for another 7 meters. But if you look at the entirety of the Antarctic continent, a landmass the size of the United States and Mexico combined, buried under ice that is up to 3 miles thick, you're looking at the ultimate planetary reservoir. If all the ice on Antarctica were to melt, global sea levels would rise by an astonishing 60 meters. Combined with Greenland and thermal expansion, we are looking at a total potential sea level rise of roughly 70 meters, over 230 feet. Imagine that map. The entire state of Florida is gone, swallowed completely by the Gulf of Mexico. The eastern seaboard of the United States is pushed hundreds of miles inland. New York City, Boston, Washington, D.C., Miami, all drowned beneath deep, corrosive salt water. The Netherlands, a nation that has fought the sea for centuries with brilliant engineering, is completely erased. In Asia, the devastation is almost incomprehensible. The sprawling, densely populated river deltas of Bangladesh, Vietnam, and China are submerged. Cities like Shanghai, Mumbai, and Kolkata, home to hundreds of millions of people, are turned into vast, shallow reefs. Nearly 40% of the global human population lives within 100 kilometers of a coastline. Our greatest megacities, our most vital agricultural hubs, our financial centers, and our historical monuments are built exactly at the edge of the current Holocene sea level. We build our civilization on a shoreline that is moving. When the oceans rise, they do not just politely inch upward. They claim the land through violence. They amplify the destructive power of storms. A hurricane that would have once caused minor flooding now rides on an elevated baseline, pushing massive, devastating storm surges miles inland, crushing infrastructure and salting the earth, making it permanently impossible to grow crops. The great migration forced by the shifting map will dwarf anything in human history. We are not talking about millions of refugees. We are looking at a future where over 1 billion people are physically forced to retreat from the encroaching sea. Where will they go? How will the inland cities absorb them? How will we feed a violently contracting global landmass while the oceans simultaneously collapse? The Ice Age shows us that the Earth is not a gentle provider. It is an arena of brutal physical forces. The mammoths could not negotiate with the rapidly warming climate. The saber-toothed cats could not outsmart the collapsing ecosystem. They were highly specialized giants, perfectly adapted to a world that ceased to exist. Humanity is currently acting like the ultimate hyper-specialized giant. We have built a staggeringly complex, massively interconnected global civilization that is perfectly, rigidly adapted to the exact temperature, the exact rainfall, and the exact sea level of the last 10,000 years. We have engineered society that requires absolute environmental stability to survive. And then we systematically began to destroy that very stability. We are firing the Clathrate gun. We are turning the oceans into acid. We are violently unbalancing the weight of the crust. We are ending the Holocene, the grand celestial clockwork of Milankovitch Cycles, the slow, beautiful wobble of the planet and the stretching of the orbit has been entirely drowned out by the roar of human industry. We have seized the planetary controls, but we are flying entirely blind. We are accelerating the machine past all known safety limits, hoping that our intelligence will somehow save us from the ruthless, unyielding laws of physics. But physics does not negotiate. Physics does not care about our economic models, our political borders, or our technological pride. Physics only responds to the concentration of carbon, the reflection of light, and the absorption of heat. We are writing the most terrifying chapter in the deep history of the planet. And we are writing it right now. This has been Earth's documentary. If this look into the dark depths of our oceans and the fragile shape of our future has moved you, please share, and subscribe. The story of our world is accelerating, and we will be here to document every critical moment. There's a profound, terrifying moment of clarity that occurs when a driver realizes their car is skidding on black ice. For a fraction of a second, the illusion of control shatters. The steering wheel becomes useless. The brakes do nothing. The immense kinetic energy of the vehicle is suddenly surrendered entirely to the merciless laws of physics, and all the driver can do is brace for the impact. Humanity is currently sitting in the driver's seat, holding a dead steering wheel, staring through the windshield at a rapidly approaching wall. We have pumped the accelerator for 2 centuries, drunk on the power of ancient, fossilized sunlight, entirely convinced that our technology made us the masters of the road. But the black ice is here. The climate system has taken over. Welcome to Earth's documentary. Today, we are staring into the abyss of the immediate future, exploring the desperate, unprecedented measures humanity might take to survive the Anthropocene, and uncovering the final, indestructible legacy we will leave behind in the deep history of the planet. As the oceans aggressively rise, as the permafrost violently exhales its trapped methane, and as the great ocean conveyor belt shudders, the global scientific community is confronting a nightmare scenario: mitigation. The act of simply reducing our carbon emissions may no longer be enough to stop the momentum of the climate machine. We have injected too much heat into the oceans. We have pushed the immense, continent-spanning ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica too close to their structural tipping points. The momentum of the Earth system is now a runaway freight train. So, what does a highly intelligent, technologically advanced species do when it realizes it has accidentally broken the planet's thermostat? It attempts to hack the system. It attempts to play God with the sky. This is the terrifying, highly controversial realm of geoengineering. If the greenhouse gases we put into the atmosphere are acting like a thick, heavy blanket trapping the heat of the sun, geoengineering proposes a brute force solution. If we cannot remove the blanket, we must block the sun. Scientists call this solar radiation management. It is a concept pulled directly from the most violent pages of the Earth's deep history. We know from studying the ancient ice cores that when massive supervolcanoes erupted in Pleistocene, they blasted millions of tons of sulfur dioxide high into the stratosphere. These microscopic sulfur aerosols acted like billions of tiny mirrors, violently reflecting incoming solar radiation back into space. The result was an immediate, brutal cooling of the planet, sometimes triggering the chaotic, deep freeze Dansgaard-Oeschger events. Geoengineering proposes that we artificially recreate the effect of a continuous, global volcanic eruption. Imagine fleets of highly specialized, high-altitude aircraft flying continuous sorties into the stratosphere, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Their payload is not weapons or passengers. Their payload is millions of tons of synthetic sulfur aerosols. They would systematically spray these reflective particles across the upper atmosphere, blanketing the entire globe in a microscopic, shimmering haze. Mathematically, it would work. The aerosols would reflect just enough sunlight to artificially lower the global temperature. We could, in theory, forcefully cool the planet back down. We could freeze the melting glaciers in their tracks. We could stop the thermal expansion of the oceans. But the price of this artificial salvation is almost incomprehensible. First, the sky would change. The deep, vibrant, cerulean blue that has defined the atmosphere of this planet for millions of years would vanish. The sulfur haze would scatter the light differently, turning the global sky into a pale, milky, blinding white. Second, while we might fix the temperature, we would be completely blindly scrambling the global weather system. By artificially dimming the sun, we would alter the fundamental evaporation cycles of the oceans. The massive, life-giving monsoon systems of Asia and Africa, systems that billions of people rely on for basic agricultural survival, could shift wildly or shut down entirely. We would be solving a heat crisis by potentially triggering global famine. Furthermore, solar radiation management does absolutely nothing to remove the carbon dioxide from the air. The oceans would continue to absorb the invisible gas. They would continue to violently acidify the base of the marine food web. The microscopic organisms that breathe the planet would continue to dissolve in the toxic water. We would save the coastlines, but we would kill the sea. But the most terrifying aspect of hacking the sky is a concept known as termination shock. Once you begin spraying the aerosols, you can never, ever stop. The carbon dioxide we pumped into the atmosphere will remain there for thousands of years, constantly trying to trap heat. The sulfur aerosols, however, fall out of the sky in a matter of months. If the fleet of spraying aircraft were ever grounded, whether by global war, economic collapse, or technological failure, the artificial mirror would instantly vanish. The suppressed heat of the planet would violently snap back. The Earth would experience decades of accumulated global warming in the span of just a few years. It would be a temperature spike so catastrophic, so sudden, that virtually no complex ecosystem on Earth could survive the whiplash. Geoengineering is not a cure. It is planetary life support. It is a desperate, terrifying tourniquet applied to a bleeding world, requiring absolute, flawless human cooperation for centuries. And as human history has proven time and time again, flawless cooperation is the one thing our species is spectacularly bad at. If blocking the sun is too dangerous, the only other option is to physically remove the poison from the sky. This is the holy grail of climate technology, direct air capture. In theory, it sounds like the perfect solution. We build massive, industrial-scale artificial trees, huge walls of high-powered fans that suck in the ambient air, pass it through highly complex chemical filters that bind to carbon dioxide, and then pump that pure, captured carbon deep underground, locking it back into the porous rock from which we originally extracted it. We know how to do this. The technology exists. There are prototype facilities running right now. But the problem is not the chemistry. The problem is the sheer, mind-bending scale of the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, despite its catastrophic warming power, is a trace gas. It makes up just over 400 parts per million in the air. To capture a single ton of carbon dioxide, you have to move, filter, and process millions of tons of ambient air. It requires an astronomical amount of energy. Currently, humanity emits roughly 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the sky every single year. To merely cancel out our current emissions, not even begin to reduce the historical debt we owe the atmosphere, we would need to build an entirely new global industry, an infrastructure project roughly the size of the entire existing global oil and gas industry, but running in reverse. And we would have to power this massive new industry entirely with clean, zero-carbon energy. Otherwise, we are just running on a treadmill. We are fighting a math problem of planetary proportions. We spent 200 years violently dismantling the Earth's buried carbon vaults, using the most dense, powerful energy source ever discovered. Try to put the smoke back into the fire, molecule by molecule. It is an engineering challenge that borders on the impossible. So what happens if we fail? What happens if we cannot hack the sky and we cannot clean the air? What happens when the black ice takes us? To see the true endpoint of the Anthropocene, we must look past the immediate panic of the next 100 years. We must look deep into the future and imagine the Earth thousands, even millions of years from now. Let us assume the worst-case scenario. Let us assume the ice sheets collapse. The oceans rise by 200 feet. The permafrost violently vents its methane and the clathrate gun fires. The global civilization that we know today, the cities of glass and steel, the intricate global supply chains, the massive coastal agricultural zones, will shatter. But humanity will not go extinct. We are the species that survived the deep freeze of the last glacial maximum armed with nothing but stone points and bone needles. We are infinitely adaptable. Pockets of human beings will survive. They will migrate to the newly temperate zones of the far north, to regions of Canada, Scandinavia, and Siberia that will have been transformed by the heat into the new agricultural heartlands of the world. They will build new societies on the shores of a radically altered ocean. But the world they inherit will be a profoundly impoverished one. They will live on a planet that has been stripped of its biological majesty. The coral reefs will be dead rock. The great rainforests will have burned and transitioned to dry savannas. The spectacular diversity of life that evolved during the stable Holocene will have been violently pruned by the heat and the acid. And as these future humans rebuild, they will look down into the dirt and they will find our legacy. In the deep future, long after the English language is forgotten, Long after the United States and China are less than myths, geologists of a new civilization will dig into the rock to understand their past. Just as we drill ice cores to read the Pleistocene, they will examine the sedimentary rock to read the Anthropocene. What will they find? They will not find a slow, graceful transition in the fossil record. They will find a violent, razor-thin biological boundary. Below this line, the rock will be rich with the fossils of the Holocene. Massive whales, diverse coral species, thick layers of ancient forests. Above the line, there will be a massive, sudden silence. A mass extinction event permanently burned into the strata, rivaling the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs. But within that razor-thin boundary, the layer of rock representing our current century, they will find a chemical signature so bizarre, so completely alien to the natural processes of the Earth, that it will be unmistakable. They will find a microscopic, global dusting of radioactive isotopes, plutonium and americium, the immortal fallout from our mid-20th century nuclear weapons tests. They will find massive, unnatural concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus, the petrified runoff from our global industrial agriculture. They will find something even stranger. They will find a new kind of rock. We call it concrete. Humanity has poured so much concrete that it now outweighs all the living biomass on Earth. In the deep future, our sprawling megacities will have been ground down by time and the encroaching sea, compressed into a unique, highly recognizable layer of artificial sedimentary rock, and mixed into this concrete, mixed into the mud of the ocean floor, embedded in the very fabric of the future Earth. They will find our ultimate, immortal creation, plastics, synthetic polymers, engineered to be indestructible, do not naturally decompose. They merely break down into smaller and smaller pieces. Microplastics have already infiltrated the deepest trenches of the ocean and the highest snow caps of the Himalayas. In millions of years, these plastics will fossilize, creating a stark, unmistakable synthetic band in the geological record. A plastic horizon. This is the technosphere. It is the physical weight of human ambition, crushed into the bedrock of the planet. When the future geologists analyze this layer, they will realize something profound. They will see the massive spike in carbon isotopes. They will see the sudden, violent acidification of the oceans. They will see the sudden disappearance of the ice. They will know exactly what we did. They will realize that a single species, briefly armed with the power of gods, unlocked the forbidden energy of the deep earth and set the sky on fire. They will see that we were not victims of a mindless astronomical cycle. We were not crushed by the blind, grinding mechanics of the Milankovitch Cycles. We were the asteroid. We were the volcano. The story of the Ice Age is the story of how the Earth shaped humanity. It battered us with freezing winds. It starved us on the dry steppes, and it violently forced us to become intelligent. The brutal, unforgiving machine of the Pleistocene took a fragile, upright primate and forged it into the absolute master of the planet. But the story of the Anthropocene is the story of how humanity shaped the Earth. We took the stable, beautiful, incredibly rare gift of the Holocene, the 10,000 years of perfect weather that allowed us to build everything we love, and we traded for 2 centuries of explosive, burning progress. We cannot go back. The ice is melting. The oceans are rising. The ancient machine is broken, and we are holding the pieces. The only question that remains is whether the same intelligence that allowed us to conquer the deep freeze can now allow us to survive the fire. We are the authors of the next epic. The ink is made of carbon, and the page is the planet itself. This has been Earth's documentary. If this journey into the deep future and the ultimate legacy of our species has challenged your perspective, please like, share, and subscribe. The history of the Earth is still unfolding, and we will be here to chronicle the storm ahead. Imagine standing on a silent shoreline, 1,000,000 years after the last human footprint has been washed away. The concrete towers of our era have been completely pulverized by the relentless grinding of deep time. The air is clean, purged of the excess carbon we pumped into it. But the world you are looking at is entirely unrecognizable. There are no mammoths. There are no saber-toothed cats. There are no familiar forests or coastal plains. But the surface is not dead. Out of the apocalyptic ashes of the Anthropocene, the Earth has not perished. It has violently, beautifully reinvented itself. Welcome to Earth's documentary. Today, We are pushing past the collapse of the world we know to witness the resurrection of the biosphere, the terrifying rise of new apex predators, and the ultimate, inescapable geological destiny of our planet in the deepest stretches of future time. When we talk about mass extinctions, we inherently view them through the lens of profound loss. We mourn the woolly rhinoceros. We lament the vanishing of the coral reefs. We dread the collapse of our own civilization. But nature does not mourn. Nature possesses an utterly ruthless, unsentimental pragmatism. A mass extinction is not the end of the book of life. It is simply the violent turning of a page. It is a massive planetary-scale pruning. It clears the board. To understand what happens next, we have to understand the brutal law of survival that governs the aftermath of an apocalypse. During periods of immense planetary stability, like the millions of years before the Ice Age or the 10,000-year calm of the Holocene, the Earth rewards the specialists. It rewards the creatures that evolve highly specific, incredibly complex adaptations to perfectly exploit a single, narrow niche. The mammoth was a specialist. It was a master of the freezing steppe, but a prisoner to it. The panda is a specialist, entirely dependent on a single type of bamboo. The blue whale is a specialist, requiring millions of tons of specific microscopic krill. Specialists are the fragile royalty of the biosphere. When the environment is stable, they are invincible kings. But the absolute moment the climate violently shifts, the moment the ice melts or the oceans turn to acid, the specialists are the very first to die. Their highly evolved armor becomes their tomb. So, who inherits the ashes? Who conquers a shattered world? The generalists, the weeds of the animal kingdom, the scavengers, the creatures that are not perfectly adapted to any one thing, but are aggressively good enough at absolutely everything. We're talking about the rats, the crows, the raccoons, the feral pigs, the coyotes, the cockroaches, and the jellyfish. These are the creatures that can eat garbage, digest rot, survive freezing winters, endure scorching summers, reproduce at terrifying speeds, and mutate rapidly to fit whatever broken environment they are thrown into. When humanity finally steps back from its total domination of the planet, whether by choice, by societal collapse, or by the sheer physical realities of a radically shifting climate, the generalists will not hesitate. They will explode into the massive, empty biological void we leave behind. We can actually see this happening right now, in real time, in the darkest corners of human history. Look at the Chernobyl exclusion zone. In 1986, a catastrophic nuclear meltdown rendered a massive swath of Ukraine completely uninhabitable for human beings. We poisoned the soil with lethal radiation. We abandoned the cities. We assumed it would remain a sterile, glowing wasteland for 10,000 years. But we forgot about the sheer, unyielding aggression of life. Within just a few decades, Chernobyl did not die. It became one of the most vibrant, booming wildlife sanctuaries in all of Europe. Without the constant pressure of human hunting, agriculture, and urbanization, the animal kingdom flooded back in. Packs of wolves stalk the decaying streets of Pripyat. Wild horses graze in the shadow of the destroyed reactor, and they are adapting to our poison. Scientists have discovered fungi growing on the highly radioactive walls of the reactor itself, radiotrophic fungi that have evolved to physically consume radiation, using melanin to convert deadly gamma rays into chemical energy, much like plants use chlorophyll to eat sunlight. We have found frogs in the exclusion zone that have rapidly evolved completely black skin to protect their DNA from the ambient radiation. Nature does not care that the environment is ruined. Nature simply changes the rules to fit the ruin. If this explosive radical evolution can happen in just 40 years in a localized disaster zone, imagine what the entire planet will do with 10 million years of empty space. In the deep future, long after the great extinction of the specialists, the survivors will begin to morph. There is a well-documented evolutionary phenomenon known as the island rule. When small animals are isolated in an environment with no major predators and abundant food, they undergo gigantism. They rapidly evolve to become massive. Conversely, when large animals are isolated with limited resources, they undergo dwarfism, shrinking to conserve energy. The Earth of the future will be a fractured landscape of new islands, some literal islands created by rising sea levels, others ecological islands created by shifting climate zones. In these isolated pockets, the descendants of the rat will not remain small, skittering scavengers. With the elephants, rhinos, and large ungulates gone, the ecological niche for massive, grazing herbivores will be wide open. Over millions of years, the rat will evolve to fill it. Imagine a rodent the size of a modern hippopotamus, grazing on the tough, scrubby vegetation of a radically warm North America. They will evolve thick, armored hides to protect themselves from the heat and massive, continuously growing incisors capable of snapping tree trunks like twigs. And wherever there's a massive herbivore, nature must invent a weapon to kill it. With the tigers, lions, and polar bears extinct, the apex predators of the future will evolve from the creatures that thrived in our shadows. The feral descendants of domestic cats and dogs will undergo terrifying transformations. A creature descended from a feral cat, having evolved over 10 million years, might possess the muscular density of a jaguar, perfectly adapted to ambush hunting in the dense, tropical rainforests that will swallow the temperate zones of Europe. Even the oceans, emptied of the great whales and the massive sharks by the acidification events of the Anthropocene, will spawn new monsters. The jellyfish and the squids, invertebrates that are remarkably resilient to toxic, acidic water, will explode in size and complexity. We may see the rise of colossal, highly intelligent cephalopods dominating the global ocean, utilizing entirely new methods of jet propulsion to hunt in the deep, warm abyss. Life will find a way, but it will not be the life we recognize. We are currently living through the painful death of the Holocene biosphere. What comes next will be the Novocene, a new era of strange, rugged, aggressive biology built on top of the plastics and concrete we leave behind. But the evolution of bizarre new animals is only a surface phenomenon. To truly grasp the ultimate destiny of the Earth, we must look deeper than the animals, deeper than the plants, and look at the actual physical rock of the planet itself. The map of the Earth is an illusion. We're used to seeing the continents as fixed, permanent shapes. But the Earth's crust is not a solid shell. It is a cracked, fragmented puzzle of massive tectonic plates, floating on an ocean of highly pressurized, boiling magma. These plates are constantly moving, grinding, tearing apart, and colliding at roughly the same speed that your fingernails grow. It seems impossibly slow. But over millions of years, that microscopic movement redraws the entire geography of the planet. Right now, the Atlantic Ocean is widening. The tectonic plates carrying the Americas are slowly moving away from Europe and Africa. The Pacific Ocean, the largest body of water on the planet, is slowly shrinking, subducting beneath the fiery tectonic boundaries known as the Ring of Fire. If we fast forward the planetary clock roughly 250 million years into the future, the current map of the Earth will be violently, completely erased. The Atlantic Ocean will eventually stop expanding. The immense pressure of the crust will cause the seafloor to fracture, creating new subduction zones. The Atlantic will begin to close. The Americas will be dragged backward, inexorably pulled toward Europe and Africa. Australia will crash violently northward into Southeast Asia. Antarctica, the great frozen vault of the South, will be dragged north into the temperate zones, shedding its ice and exposing its ancient bedrock for the first time in tens of millions of years. Eventually, the continents will collide. They will smash into one another with unimaginable, slow-motion tectonic violence. The impact will physically crush the coastlines, buckling the crust upward to forge monumental, towering mountain ranges that will dwarf the modern Himalayas. All the land masses of the Earth will fuse into a single, colossal supercontinent. Geologists call this future world Pangaea Ultima or Pangaea Proxima. This will not be a paradise. It will be an environmental nightmare. When you consolidate all the land on Earth into one massive block, you destroy the coastal climate regulators. The interior of Pangaea Ultima will be thousands of miles away from the nearest ocean. The rain clouds born at sea will never reach the center. The deep interior of the supercontinent will become a hyper-arid, unimaginably hostile desert, subjecting whatever life remains to extreme, blistering heat during the day and brutal, freezing cold at night. The single, massive ocean that surrounds this supercontinent will not be much better. With the landmass consolidated, the ocean currents will be violently disrupted. The vast, empty stretches of the global ocean will become stagnant, oxygen-deprived dead zones. Furthermore, the single, continuous coastline of Pangaea Ultima will be battered by hypercanes, monstrous, continent-sized hurricanes fed by the vast, uninterrupted expanse of warm ocean water. The assembly of a supercontinent is traditionally accompanied by the most severe mass extinction events in the planet's history. The greatest extinction ever recorded, the Permian-Triassic extinction, known as the Great Dying, which wiped out over 90% of all life on Earth, occurred exactly when the last supercontinent, Pangaea, was fully assembled roughly 250 million years ago. The formation of Pangaea Ultima will be a brutal crucible. The giant rats and the terrifying new predators will be pushed to the absolute edge of survival. The cycle of fire and ice, of extinction and rebirth, will continue its blind, ruthless rhythm. But even Pangaea Ultima is not the end of the story. To see the final chapter of Earth's documentary, we must look away from the rocks and look up at the sky. We must look at the star that gives us life. The sun is a main sequence star, and like all stars, it is slowly, inevitably changing. Deep within its core, the sun is fusing hydrogen into helium in a massive, continuous nuclear explosion. As it burns through its hydrogen fuel, the core contracts, becomes denser, and burns hotter. Because of this, the overall luminosity of the sun is slowly increasing. Every 100 million years, the sun gets roughly 1% brighter. It does not sound like much, but over the deep span of geological time, it is a death sentence. Roughly 1 billion years from now, the sun will be 10% brighter than it is today. That subtle increase in solar radiation will push the Earth past its final, absolute tipping point. The planet will cross the inner edge of the habitable zone. The global temperature will rise to a point where the ice-albedo feedback, the ocean currents, and the carbon cycle can no longer compensate. The heat will become so intense that the oceans will begin to rapidly evaporate. Millions of tons of water vapor will be pushed into the atmosphere, and water vapor is an incredibly potent greenhouse gas. This will trigger the ultimate, unstoppable runaway greenhouse effect. The oceans will boil. The massive bodies of water that sculpted our coastlines, that absorbed our carbon, that nurtured the very first single-celled organisms billions of years ago, will be violently ripped into sky and slowly stripped away by the solar wind. Without the oceans to act as a lubricant, the tectonic plates will grind to a halt. The volcanoes will cease to erupt. The carbon cycle will completely die. The Earth will become a sterile, scorching, radiation-blasted rock, closely resembling modern-day Venus. The giant rodents, the sprawling forests, the deep-sea monsters, and the final, crumbling remnants of human civilization's plastic horizon will be completely incinerated. The grand, violent, beautiful biological experiment of planet Earth will come to a permanent end. The great silence will return. This is the ultimate cosmic perspective. It is terrifying, but it is also profoundly, deeply clarifying. When we look at the Ice Age, we see a brutal, chaotic machine that forged humanity. When we look at the Anthropocene, we see a species that foolishly believed it had conquered that machine. And when we look at the deep future, we see that the machine is entirely indifferent to our existence. The Earth is a temporary oasis in an incredibly hostile universe. We are not the masters of deep time. We are merely its current passengers. The 10,000-year stability of the Holocene was a miraculous, statistical anomaly. The fact that you are alive right now, breathing an atmosphere perfectly calibrated to your biology, standing on a world that is neither a frozen snowball nor a boiling wasteland, is a cosmic lottery win of staggering proportions. The Ice Age taught us how to survive. The coming centuries will test if we learn the lesson. We cannot stop the movement of the continents. We cannot stop the brightening of the sun. But we do hold the power to dictate the immediate future of the biosphere. We have the intelligence to step back from the black ice, to cool the warming oceans, and preserve the fragile, beautiful sliver of time we have been given. The history of the Earth is not a tragedy. It is a monument to resilience. The mammoths fell, the glaciers melted, the continents shattered. But the rhythm of life continued, and the rhythm will continue, with or without us. The choice of whether we endure to witness it, or whether we merely become a dark, radioactive line in the rock for future geologists to find, belongs entirely to us. This has been Earth's documentary. If this journey from the freezing plains of the Pleistocene to the ultimate destiny of our solar system has changed how you view the ground beneath your feet, please like, share, and subscribe. The story of our world is the greatest epic in the universe, and we will be here to explore every final frontier. We have traveled to the absolute edge of time, watching the oceans boil away under a dying sun. But we must now pull ourselves back. We must pull back from the deep, scorching future, past the crushing tectonic collision of Pangea Ultima, past the radioactive plastic horizon buried in the rock, and return to the present. We must return to this exact, fragile, agonizingly beautiful second in the history of the universe. Right now, in highly sanitized, freezing laboratories around the world, scientists are standing in the dark, holding the ice cores. They are holding the frozen breath of the Pleistocene. They are looking at the microscopic bubbles of ancient air, reading the catastrophic temperature swings of the Dansgaard-Oeschger events, tracing the thick, gritty layers of desert dust, and watching the carbon dioxide plunge and soar in perfect rhythm with the slow, massive heartbeat of the solar system. For 2.6 million years, that heartbeat was the only rhythm that mattered. Jupiter and Saturn pulled. The Earth wobbled. The ice advanced and the ice retreated. The woolly mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, the giant ground sloths. They were all magnificent, towering expressions of that celestial rhythm. They were born of the cold, and when the cold violently vanished, they were erased. We are the children of that same brutal rhythm. The Ice Age did not just shape the continents. It shaped our minds. It forced an unremarkable, upright primate to figure out how to skin a wolf, how to carve an eyed needle from a mammoth tusk, how to build a fortress out of bone, and how to outsmart a climate that was actively trying to kill us. The sheer, ruthless hostility of the Pleistocene is what turned humanity into the ultimate survival machine. But survival is no longer our challenge. We won the war against the cold. The glaciers retreated. The climate flatlined into the miraculous stability of the Holocene. And we put down our spears. We planted wheat. We built Rome. We split the atom. We mapped the genome. We walked on the moon. Yet, in our triumph, we forgot where we came from. We forgot that the stable, warm world we built our entire civilization upon is a massive, temporary geological anomaly. We began treating the Earth as a static, indestructible stage for human history, instead of the violent, hyperreactive, living machine that it actually is. We dug into the deep Earth, found the fossilized sunlight of 100 million years ago, and we burned it. We burned it to build our cities, to fly across oceans, to power the internet, and to feed 8 billion people. We did not do this out of malice. We did it out of ingenuity. We did it because we are exactly what the Ice Age forced us to be, relentlessly, brilliantly adaptable. But ingenuity without wisdom is a planetary death sentence. By pulling the ancient carbon out of the rock and injecting it into the sky, we have accidentally seized control of the planet's thermostat. We have ripped the steering wheel away from the Milankovitch Cycles. We are physically overpowering the gravitational pull of Jupiter and Saturn with the sheer force of our industrial exhaust. We are melting the Arctic mirrors. We are choking the deep ocean conveyor belt. We are turning the oceans to acid and waking the sleeping dragon of methane in the permafrost. We are no longer just surviving the climate. We are the climate. This is a defining, terrifying paradox of the Anthropocene. We have the power of gods, but we are still operating with the tribal, short-term instincts of the hunter-gatherers we were 20,000 years ago. We are holding a thermal detonator, arguing over the price of the metal casing. The Earth does not care about our economies. It does not care about our political borders. The atmosphere does not negotiate. The physics of the greenhouse effect will operate with the exact same blind, crushing indifference as the towering walls of the Laurentide Ice Sheet. If we push the climate system past its tipping points, the Earth will simply turn the page. It will purge the specialists. It will flood the coasts. It will burn the forests. It will spawn the Novocene, and the world will move on without us, leaving nothing but a thin, synthetic layer in the rock. But we do not have to be a dark line in the strata. The defining trait of humanity is not destruction. Our defining trait is our ability to look at the universe, understand its mechanics, and change our fate. We are the only species in the multi-billion-year history of this planet that has the capacity to read its own fossil record. We are the only creatures that can drill into the ice and realize we're standing on the edge of an abyss. We know exactly what the problem is. We know the chemistry. We know the physics. We know the terrifying stakes. The knowledge is not hiding from us. It is screaming at us from every melting glacier, and every bleaching coral reef. The end of the Ice Age was an environmental apocalypse that we survived by the skin of our teeth. But the end of the Holocene is an apocalypse we are choosing. And because we are choosing it, we still have the power to unchoose it. We can leave the ancient carbon in the ground. We can rebuild our energy grids to harness the wind and the sun. We can restore the vanishing forests to draw the poison from the sky. We can step back from the brink of the hothouse and learn to live within the boundaries of the beautiful, fragile machine that gave us life. It is the greatest, most terrifying test of intelligence any species has ever faced. We must transition from being the conquerors of the earth to being its conscious, deliberate guardians. We must evolve, not just in our technology, but in our wisdom. The Ice Age is over. The Holocene is dying. The future is entirely, terrifyingly in our hands. What happens next is up to us. Thank you for embarking on this incredible journey through the deep time, the freezing past, and the burning future of our planet. If this exploration of the forces that shape our world has moved you, please share, and subscribe to Earth's documentary. We will never stop uncovering the mysteries of the cosmos and the ground beneath our feet, and we want you with us for every step of the journey. Keep looking up, keep looking deep, and we will see you in the next chapter of Earth's documentary.